This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. On moving day, we were busy unpacking boxes when I noticed our next-door neighbor peeking out his window at us. He was an older man, probably in his 60s, with thinning gray hair and thick glasses. When he saw me looking, he gave a friendly wave. I waved back, thinking it was nice to have a welcoming neighbor. Later that afternoon, the man came over to introduce himself as Mr. Johnson. He seemed pleasant enough, if a bit awkward socially. He told us he'd lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years and offered to help if we needed anything. We thanked him for stopping by, and I remember thinking it was great to have such a friendly neighbor. But over the next few days, I started to feel uneasy. Every time I glanced out the window, Mr. Johnson seemed to be there, staring at our house. When I'd go out to get the mail or take out the trash, he'd suddenly appear in his yard, asking how we were settling in. It felt like he was watching our every move. Emily brushed off my concerns at first. "He's just being neighborly," she said. "I'm sure he's just lonely and excited to have new people next door." I tried to convince myself she was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about Mr. Johnson's behavior. About a week after we moved in, things took a disturbing turn. I woke up early one morning and went downstairs to make coffee. As I passed by the living room window, movement caught my eye. To my horror, I saw Mr. Johnson standing in our front yard, his face pressed against the glass, peering inside. When he saw me, he quickly shuffled away. My hands shaking, I told Emily what I'd seen. She was visibly shaken but tried to rationalize it. Maybe he thought he saw something strange and was checking to make sure we were okay, she suggested uncertainly, but we both knew this was beyond normal behavior. That night we heard strange noises outside our bedroom window. Scraping sounds like someone was trying to peer in. I shot up in bed, my heart pounding. Emily clung to me, terrified. We called the police, but by the time they arrived, there was no sign of anyone. The officer suggested it may have been raccoons or some other animal, but we knew better. The next day, we decided to confront Mr. Johnson. We knocked on his door, but there was no answer. As we turned to leave, we noticed a pile of mail spilling out of his overstuffed mailbox. Some of the envelopes were addressed to Mr. Thomas Wilson. Confused, we checked the name on the house number. It clearly said Johnson. A chill ran down my spine as I realized our neighbor had lied about his identity. That evening, we found an envelope slipped under our front door. Inside were several grainy photos clearly taken through our windows, us eating dinner, watching TV, even sleeping in our bed. Scrawled on the back of one photo were the words, "I'm always watching." Panicked, we called the police again. They took our statement and the photos as evidence, promising to investigate. But they warned us that without concrete proof of a crime, there wasn't much they could do. We felt helpless and violated. We started taking precautions, installing security cameras, keeping curtains drawn at all times, even sleeping in shifts so someone was always on watch. But nothing seemed to deter Mr. Johnson, or whoever he really was. We'd catch glimpses of him lurking in his yard or peering out his windows at all hours. Sometimes we'd hear footsteps on our porch in the middle of the night. The photos kept coming, each batch more disturbing than the last. Close-ups of us through windows we thought were hidden. Pictures taken from impossible angles, as if he'd somehow gotten inside our home. The messages became more threatening. "You can't hide from me," and "I'll have you soon." We were prisoners in our own home, too terrified to leave for more than a few hours at a time. Emily started having panic attacks. I lost my appetite and could barely sleep. We discussed moving, but we'd sunk all our savings into this house. We felt trapped. Everything came to a head last night. We'd finally fallen into an exhausted sleep around 2 a.m. when a loud crash jolted us awake. The sound of breaking glass came from downstairs. Emily let out a strangled scream as we heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. I grabbed the baseball bat I'd started keeping by the bed and pushed Emily toward the master bathroom. "Lock yourself in and call 911, I whispered urgently. She nodded, tears streaming down her face as she scrambled into the bathroom. Heart pounding, I positioned myself by the bedroom door, bat raised. The footsteps grew closer. I could hear ragged breathing on the other side of the door. Then the knob slowly began to turn. The door burst open, and there stood Mr. Johnson, or whatever his real name was. His eyes were wild, and he brandished a large kitchen knife. "You're mine now," he snarled, lunging toward me. I swung the bat with all my might, catching him in the shoulder. He staggered back, but kept coming. We grappled, the knife coming terrifyingly close to my face several times. I managed to knock the blade from his hand, but he was surprisingly strong for an older man. Just as I felt my strength giving out, I heard sirens in the distance. Mr. Johnson's head snapped toward the sound. Taking advantage of his distraction, I shoved him hard. He stumbled backward and tumbled down the stairs. Moments later, police swarmed the house. They found Mr. Johnson unconscious at the bottom of the stairs. As they led him away in handcuffs, one officer explained that they'd been investigating him for similar stalking incidents in other neighborhoods. His real name was Gerald Simmons, and he had a long history of obsessive behavior and violence. Emily and I spent the rest of the night giving statements to the police. We're both pretty banged up. I've got a nasty gash on my arm where the knife caught me, and we're both covered in bruises. But we're alive, and that's what matters. Now, sitting here in the harsh fluorescent light of the police station, I'm still shaking. The adrenaline has worn off, leaving me feeling hollow and drained. Emily is asleep in the chair next to me, her face tear-stained but peaceful for the first time in weeks. I don't know what we're going to do now. The thought of going back to that house makes me feel physically ill, but I also can't stand the idea of him, Gerald, Mr. Johnson, whatever his name is, winning by driving us from our home. One thing's for certain, I'll never again brush off that gut feeling that something's not right. We ignored so many red flags, rationalizing away our fears. Never again. From now on, we'll trust our instincts and look out for each other. It's the only way to feel safe in a world where monsters can hide behind friendly smiles and borrowed names. As I sit here waiting for the sun to rise, I'm grateful we survived, but haunted by how close we came to a much darker ending. I know the road to feeling safe again will be long, but at least now we can start to heal. And maybe, just maybe, our story can serve as a warning to others. Trust your gut, watch out for your neighbors, and remember, sometimes the real monsters aren't hiding under the bed, but right next door. From the moment I arrived, something felt off about Mr. Thompson, the landlord. He was a tall, gangly man in his 60s with wispy gray hair and sunken eyes that darted around nervously. As he showed me to my room, I noticed his movements were oddly stiff and jerky, like a marionette being controlled by invisible strings. He avoided making eye contact the entire time, mumbling about house rules in a low, raspy voice. I tried to shake off my unease, chalking it up to first-day jitters in a new place. But over the next few days, Mr. Thompson's bizarre behavior only intensified. I'd catch glimpses of him shuffling down the hallway at odd hours, his limbs moving at unnatural angles. Sometimes I'd hear strange guttural noises coming from his room late at night. Not quite human, not quite animal. One evening, I was in the kitchen making dinner when Mr. Thompson suddenly appeared in the doorway. He stood there silently for several long minutes, staring blankly at the wall behind me. When I nervously asked if he needed anything, he slowly turned his head to face me. His eyes were glassy and unfocused, like there was nothing behind them. Without a word, he abruptly turned and shambled away. I started spending as much time as possible out of the house, dreading my encounters with the eerily off-kilter landlord. But I couldn't afford to move out on such short notice, so I tried my best to avoid him and stick it out. Things came to a head about 2 weeks after I moved in. I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and heard strange chanting coming from Mr. Thompson's room down the hall. Curiosity got the better of me, and I crept closer to listen. The sounds were like nothing I'd ever heard before, guttural and inhuman. Heart pounding, I noticed his door was slightly ajar. I knew I shouldn't look, but some morbid fascination compelled me to peer inside. What I saw chilled me to my core. The walls were covered in strange symbols and diagrams drawn in what looked horribly like blood. Candles flickered, casting eerie shadows. And there was Mr. Thompson, contorted into an impossible position in the center of a chalk circle, chanting in that otherworldly language. I must have made a sound, because suddenly his head snapped towards me with unnatural speed. His eyes were completely black and his mouth stretched into an impossibly wide grin full of sharpened teeth. I ran. I sprinted to my room, threw on some clothes, and grabbed my phone to call the police. But as I tried to dial, I heard heavy footsteps rapidly approaching. My door burst open, and there stood Mr. Thompson, hunched and snarling like a feral animal. I ducked past him and raced for the stairs, my heart feeling like it would explode. He was right behind me, moving with terrifying speed. As I reached the front door, I felt his cold, clammy hands grab my shirt. I struggled desperately, screaming for help. Just as I thought it was all over, there was a loud crash. Police officers swarmed in, shouting and pointing guns. Mr. Thompson released me and tried to flee, but they quickly wrestled him to the ground. I sat on the curb in shock as the officers led a thrashing, shrieking Mr. Thompson to a police car. One of them gently asked if I was all right and explained they'd received reports of strange noises and lights from the house. When no one answered their knocks, they'd forced entry. The next few hours were a blur of police interviews and paramedics checking me over. They searched the house and found evidence of all sorts of disturbing occult activities. Apparently, Mr. Thompson had a history of mental illness and had stopped taking his medication months ago. I ended up staying with a friend for a few weeks while I looked for a new place. I still have nightmares about those black eyes and razor-sharp teeth. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear that unearthly chanting. I don't know what would have happened if the police hadn't shown up when they did. What was Mr. Thompson planning to do to me? What dark forces was he trying to summon in that blood-stained room? I shudder to think how close I came to finding out. Even now, months later, I'm jumpy and paranoid. I triple-check the locks on my doors and windows every night. I'm seeing a therapist to deal with the trauma, but I don't know if I'll ever feel truly safe again. That boarding house may be behind me, but the horrors I witnessed there will haunt me forever. I keep wondering if there was something I could have done differently. Should I have noticed the warning signs earlier? Could I have helped Mr. Thompson before things spiraled so far out of control? Or was this nightmare inevitable from the moment I set foot in that cursed house? All I know is that I'll never again ignore my instincts when something feels off. That nagging sense of unease could be the only thing standing between you and unimaginable terror. I hope my story serves as a warning to others. Be careful who you trust, and always be aware of your surroundings. You never know what darkness might be lurking just beneath the surface of normality. I still have so many unanswered questions. What exactly was Mr. Thompson involved in? Were there others like him? Could it happen again? The police reports were frustratingly vague, citing an ongoing investigation. Sometimes I wonder if there was more going on than a simple case of mental illness. Those symbols I saw, that inhuman chanting, it all seemed too elaborate, too practiced. Part of me is terrified that Mr. Thompson actually succeeded in whatever he was trying to do that night, that he opened some kind of door that can't be closed. I've tried researching occult symbolism and rituals, hoping to make sense of what I saw, but every time I start digging, I get overwhelmed by a sense of dread, like I'm teetering on the edge of some vast, terrifying truth that my mind can't comprehend. There are nights when I lie awake, convinced I can hear faint whispers in a language I don't understand. I tell myself it's just the wind or my imagination running wild, but deep down, I'm not so sure. I've thought about reaching out to the other tenants who lived there to see if they experienced anything strange, but part of me is afraid of what I might learn. Maybe it's better not to know, to try to move on and forget. But how can I forget when the memories are so vivid? The sight of Mr. Thompson's distorted face, the smell of those candles, the chill of his hands on my skin, it's all seared into my brain. Sometimes I catch myself absently tracing those bizarre symbols I saw, my hand moving of its own accord. I always stop as soon as I realize what I'm doing, but it scares me. What if some part of that evil rubbed off on me? I've started having these vivid, unsettling dreams. I'm back in that house, but everything is warped and twisted. The hallways stretch on forever, the walls pulse like they're breathing, and always, in the distance, I hear Mr. Thompson calling my name. I try to run, but my legs won't move. I try to scream, but no sound comes out. I always wake up just as he's about to catch me, drenched in sweat and gasping for air. My friends and family have been supportive, but I can tell they don't really understand. How could they? Unless you've stared into that abyss, unless you've felt the touch of something so utterly wrong and alien, you can't truly comprehend the fear. The knowledge that the world isn't what you thought it was, that there are things out there beyond our understanding. I'm trying to rebuild my life, to move past the trauma. But it's hard when you feel like you're constantly looking over your shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Every unexplained sound makes me jump. Every shadow in the corner of my eye could be a threat. I know I need to find a way to let go, to stop obsessing over what happened. But how do you move on when your entire worldview has been shattered? How do you find peace when you know there are monsters hiding in plain sight? All I can do is take it one day at a time. Focus on the little things, a good cup of coffee, a sunny day, a kind word from a friend. Slowly but surely, I'm trying to reclaim my life from the shadows. But I know I'll never be the same person I was before I stepped into that boarding house. For better or worse, my eyes have been opened to a reality I can never unsee. I've moved into this new apartment about a month ago, and at first everything seemed normal. It was a nice place in a good neighborhood, way better than my old cramped studio. I was excited for a fresh start. The first week went by uneventfully as I settled in and got used to my new surroundings. Then the letters started arriving. It was just one at first, a plain white envelope addressed to Sarah at my apartment number. I figured it was just leftover mail for the previous tenant and set it aside, planning to return it to the post office when I had a chance. A few days later, another letter for Sarah showed up. Then another. Soon I was getting one almost every day. I tried returning them to the mailman, explaining that Sarah didn't live here anymore, but they just kept coming. I even asked my landlord about the previous tenant, but he said the apartment had been empty for months before I moved in, and he didn't have any forwarding info for the last occupant. At first, I just tossed the letters in a pile, unopened. But as they kept accumulating, I started to get curious. Who was sending all these letters to Sarah? And why were they still coming here if she had moved out months ago? Against my better judgment, I finally opened one. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "I miss you, Sarah. Why did you leave me? Please come back." A chill ran down my spine. There was something unsettling about the tone. I shouldn't have read it, but now that I had, I couldn't stop myself from opening the others. They all contained similar messages, becoming increasingly desperate and angry. "Sarah, answer me. I know you're there. You can't hide from me forever. I'll find you no matter where you go." The most recent one simply said, "I'm watching you." I tried to tell myself it was nothing to worry about, just some creep stalking the previous tenant. But I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I started double-checking that my doors and windows were locked at night. During the day, I found myself constantly glancing out the windows, half expecting to see someone staring back at me. One night about 2 weeks ago, I woke up suddenly at 3 a.m. At first, I wasn't sure what had disturbed me, but then I heard it. Soft footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom. My heart started racing. I laid perfectly still, straining my ears. The footsteps slowly approached my closed bedroom door. Then they stopped. I held my breath, too terrified to move. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the footsteps retreat and fade away. As soon as it was quiet, I leapt out of bed and turned on all the lights. I searched the entire apartment, but found no sign of an intruder. The front door was still locked and chained. Had I imagined it? Was it just normal sounds from a neighbor's apartment that my paranoid mind had twisted into something sinister? I tried to convince myself that was the case, but I barely slept for the rest of the night. The next morning, another letter was waiting for me. This one said, "I was so close to you last night. Next time, I'll be even closer." I was really freaked out now. I went to the police station to file a report, but they just brushed me off. They said there was no evidence of an actual break-in and suggested the letters were probably just being misdirected by the post office. They told me to put up a "no junk mail" sign and have my locks changed if I was worried. I did change the locks, but it didn't help my peace of mind. I started having trouble sleeping, jumping at every little noise. During the day, I felt like I was constantly being watched. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there was never anything there. The letters kept coming, growing more threatening. "You can't keep me out forever. I'll find a way in soon. Your new locks won't stop me." I was a nervous wreck. I couldn't focus at work. I stopped going out except when absolutely necessary. I considered moving, but I was locked into a year-long lease that I couldn't afford to break. Then, about a week ago, things escalated even further. I came home from work to find an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a photo of me, clearly taken from the street outside my living room window. On the back was written, "I'm always watching." I freaked out. I called the police again, insisting they take it seriously this time. They reluctantly took a report, but said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. They suggested I stay with friends or family for a while if I felt unsafe. I ended up crashing on a coworker's couch for a few nights. But I knew I couldn't avoid my apartment forever. Yesterday, I finally worked up the courage to go back. As soon as I walked in, I knew something was wrong. Nothing was visibly out of place, but the air felt different somehow, heavier, like someone had been there while I was gone. With shaking hands, I checked all the rooms. Everything looked normal until I got to the bedroom. There, propped up on my pillow, was another envelope. I almost ran out right then, but I had to know what was inside. I tore it open with trembling fingers. It contained a single Polaroid photo. The image made my blood run cold. It showed me sleeping in my bed, clearly taken from inside my bedroom. On the back was a message. "Welcome home, Sarah. I've missed you so much." That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed some essentials and got the hell out of there. I'm writing this from a motel room across town. I don't know what to do next. The police still won't take me seriously. My landlord says I'm on the hook for the rest of the lease unless I find someone to sublet. I'm terrified to go back to that apartment, but I don't know where else to go. I can't afford to keep staying in motels. I'm running out of money and options. I don't understand any of this. Who is doing this and why? How are they getting into my apartment? Why do they think I'm Sarah? I've racked my brain trying to make sense of it, but I'm at a total loss. Part of me wonders if I'm losing my mind. Maybe there is no stalker and this is all some kind of mental breakdown. But those photos were real. Someone was in my home, watching me sleep. The threat feels so real and immediate. I haven't slept more than an hour or two at a time in days. Every noise makes me jump. I feel like I'm always looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone there. I don't know how much longer I can live like this. I'm posting this in hopes that someone out there might have advice or insight. Has anyone experienced anything similar? Am I overreacting? What should I do next? I'm desperate for help or answers. I can't shake the feeling that whoever is behind this is closing in, like they're always just a step behind me, no matter where I go. I'm terrified of what might happen if they catch up to me. For now, I'm going to try to get some sleep here at the motel, but I know I'll be lying awake for hours, startling at every sound in the hallway. In the morning, I'll have to figure out my next move. I just wish I understood what was really going on. This whole situation feels like a nightmare I can't wake up from. If anyone has any suggestions, please let me know. I'm open to any ideas at this point, no matter how out there they might seem. I just want my life back. I want to feel safe in my own home again. But I'm not sure that will ever be possible now. Not with the lingering fear that someone is always watching, always waiting, always ready to strike when I least expect it. I'll update if anything else happens. For now, I'm going to triple check that the motel room door is locked and try to get some rest. But I know I'll be on edge all night, straining to hear any sounds of footsteps approaching. Wish me luck. I have a feeling I'm going to need it. I recently moved into a new house with my wife and 2 kids, hoping for a fresh start in a quiet neighborhood. We were excited about the spacious rooms and beautiful backyard, but little did we know the terror that awaited us behind those walls. It started small at first, just little things that were easy to brush off. I'd come home from work and find a chair pulled out from the dining table, even though I distinctly remembered pushing it in that morning. Or I'd wake up in the middle of the night to get a glass of water and swear I heard the faint sound of footsteps upstairs, only to find the kids fast asleep in their beds. My wife Sarah noticed it too. She'd be folding laundry in the living room and suddenly feel like someone was watching her from the hallway. But when she'd turned to look, there was never anyone there, just an empty corridor and that lingering sensation of eyes on her back. We tried to rationalize it all away. New house jitters, overactive imaginations, that sort of thing. But deep down, we both knew something wasn't right. There was a heaviness in the air, like the house itself was holding its breath. Things escalated about a week after we moved in. I was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard my 5-year-old daughter scream from upstairs. I dropped everything and ran to her room, heart pounding. She was huddled in the corner, tears streaming down her face. "The lady in the mirror scared me, Daddy," she whimpered. I looked at her vanity mirror but saw only our reflections. "What lady, sweetie?" I asked gently. "The old lady with the scary face," she said. "She was right there, looking at me." Then she put her finger to her lips like this. My daughter demonstrated the shushing motion. A chill ran down my spine. I comforted her as best I could, telling her it was just her imagination. But later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I could have sworn I saw a flicker of movement in that same mirror, just for a split second, like a face peering around the edge of the glass. I blinked and it was gone. The incidents kept piling up. Books would fall off shelves for no reason. Doors would slam shut on perfectly still days. My wife's necklaces would end up tangled in impossible knots. One night I woke up around 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. As I was washing my hands, I heard what sounded like whispers coming from inside the walls. It was so faint I could barely make it out, but it sounded like a woman's voice saying, "Get out, get out," over and over. I pressed my ear to the wall, heart racing, but it had already faded away. I didn't tell my wife about that one. I didn't want to scare her more than she already was, but I could see the fear in her eyes, the way she'd jump at every little noise. We were all on edge, walking on eggshells in our own home. The breaking point came about a month after we moved in. My wife decided to finally tackle unpacking the boxes we'd stored in the attic. I offered to help, but she insisted she could handle it. I was in the backyard with the kids when I heard her blood-curdling scream. I've never run so fast in my life. I found her at the bottom of the attic stairs, white as a sheet and shaking uncontrollably. "What happened?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. She could barely speak through her tears. "I was up there unpacking, and I heard. "What did you hear?" I pressed. "A voice," she whispered, right in my ear. It said, "Get out before it's too late." Oh God, it sounded so angry. I held her close, my mind racing. This was beyond anything we could explain away. Something was in our house. Something that didn't want us there. We packed up and left that very night, crashing at my parents' place while we figured out our next move. We never went back to that house, not even to get the rest of our stuff. We just couldn't bear the thought of stepping foot in there again. It's been years now, and we're settled in a new place across the country. But I still get chills thinking about those weeks in that house. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed. What did that voice mean by too late? I try not to dwell on it, but late at night when the house is quiet, I still find myself straining to listen, waiting to hear footsteps or whispers, wondering if we're truly alone or if something followed us here. Something we can't see, but that's always watching, always waiting. I don't know if I'll ever feel truly safe in my own home again. That house took something from us, our peace of mind, our sense of security, and sometimes, in my darkest moments, I worry it took even more than that whatever was in those walls latched onto us somehow and is just biding its time before it strikes again. All I know is that there are things in this world we can't explain, things that defy logic and reason. And once you've experienced them firsthand, you can never go back to how things were before. You're always looking over your shoulder, jumping at shadows, because you know the truth, that sometimes the monsters are real, and they're closer than we ever want to believe. I still have nightmares about that house. In them, I'm wandering the halls, searching for my family. But all I find are empty rooms and whispers in the walls, and no matter how fast I run, I can never seem to find the exit. I always wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding. My wife and I don't talk about it much anymore. It's like an unspoken agreement between us. We've moved on, started fresh, but I see it in her eyes sometimes, that same haunted look. I know she's remembering too. Our kids were young enough that they don't recall much about that house. But sometimes my daughter will mention the lady in the mirror, and I feel that old familiar dread creeping back in. I just hug her tight and change the subject. I've thought about researching the history of that house, trying to find some explanation for what we experienced. But part of me is afraid of what I might uncover. Some things are better left in the dark. All I know is that I'll never take feeling safe for granted again. Home is supposed to be a sanctuary, a place of comfort and peace. But for us, it became a waking nightmare. And even though we've physically escaped, the memories linger. The fear lingers. I still find myself checking closets and underbeds before I go to sleep each night. I still pause sometimes, listening for whispers or footsteps when the house is quiet. And I still wake up sometimes in the dead of night, heart racing, convinced I've seen a figure standing at the foot of our bed. Maybe one day we'll fully put it behind us. Maybe the fear will fade and become nothing more than a distant bad dream. But for now, we live with the knowledge that there are things in this world beyond our understanding. Things that can invade the safety of our homes and shatter our sense of security. So if you're reading this and you've never experienced anything like it, count yourself lucky. And if you have, well, you're not alone. There are more of us out there than you might think. People who have glimpsed behind the veil and seen that reality isn't always what it seems. All we can do is hold our loved ones close and try to move forward, but always with one eye over our shoulder, watching for shadows that shouldn't be there. Because once you've lived through something like that, you never truly feel safe again. The world becomes a different place when you realize that sometimes the things that go bump in the night are real, and they might be coming for you next. The party was in full swing by 8 p.m. About 30 of my closest friends and relatives were mingling throughout the first floor, admiring the original hardwood floors and ornate crown molding. The kitchen was stocked with drinks and hors d'oeuvres, and upbeat music filled the air. I was feeling on top of the world as I made my rounds, chatting with guests and accepting compliments on my new home. Around 9:30, I headed upstairs to use the master bathroom. As I was washing my hands, I heard a strange shuffling noise coming from the walk-in closet. At first, I thought it might be one of my cats who had snuck upstairs, but then I remembered I had shut them in the spare bedroom to keep them from escaping during the party. A chill ran down my spine as I slowly approached the closet door. The noise had stopped, but I could swear I heard faint breathing coming from inside. With trembling hands, I grasped the doorknob and flung the door open. I let out a strangled scream as I came face to face with a disheveled man crouching in my closet. He looked to be in his 50s, with wild gray hair and a scraggly beard. His clothes were filthy and torn. The acrid smell of unwashed body odor assaulted my nostrils. "Who the hell are you?" I shouted, stumbling backwards. "What are you doing in my house?" The man stood up, holding his hands out in a placating gesture. "Whoa there, no need to yell," he said in a gravelly voice. "Name's Frank. I'm a friend of Bill and Linda's, the folks who used to own this place." My mind was reeling. How long had this man been hiding in my closet? How did he get in? "Bill and Linda don't live here anymore," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I bought this house from them 3 months ago. You need to leave right now." Frank's eyes narrowed. "Now hold on just a minute," he growled. "Bill and Linda said I could stay here whenever I needed a place to crash. I've been coming and going for years. You can't just kick me out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This strange man thought he had some kind of right to be in my home. "I don't care what arrangement you had before," I said firmly. "This is my house now, and you are trespassing. Get out before I call the police." "You're making a big mistake," Frank snarled, taking a menacing step towards me. "I know every nook and cranny of this old house. You really think you can keep me out?" Terror gripped me as I realized how dangerous this situation was. Here I was, alone upstairs with an unstable intruder, while my oblivious guests partied below. I turned and fled from the room, nearly tripping in my haste to get down the stairs. I burst into the living room, frantically scanning for my friend Jake, who was a police officer. I spotted him by the fireplace and rushed over. "Jake, there's an intruder upstairs," I gasped. "He was hiding in my closet. Please, you have to help." Jake immediately switched into cop mode. He pulled me aside and got the details, then discreetly asked a few other male guests to accompany him upstairs. I stayed below, trying to keep my composure and not alarm the other party-goers. A tense 10 minutes passed before Jake returned. He pulled me into the study for a private conversation. "We searched the entire upstairs but didn't find anyone," he said. "Are you sure about what you saw?" "Yes, I'm positive," I insisted. He said his name was Frank and that he knew the previous owners. He must have escaped somehow. Jake nodded gravely. "I believe you. I'm going to call this in and get some officers out here to do a thorough search of the property. In the meantime, I think you should end the party early. We don't want to risk anyone's safety." I agreed and made an announcement to my guests that I wasn't feeling well and needed to cut the evening short. Most people were understanding, though I could tell some were confused by the abrupt ending. As they filed out, Jake pulled a few trusted friends aside and filled them in on the situation. They agreed to stay behind and help secure the house. The next hour was a blur as police officers arrived and conducted a full sweep of the house and surrounding property. They found no sign of Frank, but did discover a basement window that had been pried open. It seemed that's how he had been entering and exiting undetected. I gave a full statement to the police, including a description of Frank and everything he had said to me. They took it very seriously and promised to increase patrols in the neighborhood. Before leaving, they helped me check all the locks and entrances to ensure the house was completely secure. By the time everyone left, it was nearly 2 a.m. I was utterly exhausted but far too keyed up to sleep. I double and triple checked every lock, window, and possible entry point. I turned on every light in the house, unable to face the darkness. As I sat alone in my living room, I was overwhelmed by feelings of violation and fear. This was supposed to be my safe haven, my dream home. Now it felt tainted. Every creak and groan of the old house made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that Frank was still out there, watching and waiting for another opportunity to intrude. I barely slept that night, or for many nights after. I had a security system installed within days, complete with cameras covering every angle of the property. I replaced all the locks and added heavy-duty deadbolts. I even adopted a large dog for added protection and companionship. Weeks passed with no sign of Frank, but I remained on high alert. I scrutinized every stranger I passed on the street, wondering if it was him. I obsessively checked and rechecked the security footage. Sometimes I thought I caught glimpses of movement in the yard at night, but it always turned out to be nothing. Slowly, very slowly, I started to relax and feel safe in my home again. But I don't think I'll ever be able to fully shake the feeling that I'm not alone, that somewhere in the shadows, Frank is still lurking, biding his time until he can reclaim what he believes is rightfully his. Every now and then, I'll open my closet door and catch a whiff of that unwashed odor. In my darkest moments, I wonder if I simply imagined the whole thing. But then I remember the wild look in Frank's eyes, the menace in his voice, and I know it was all too real. I still love my beautiful Victorian home, but now I see it through different eyes. Every nook and cranny that once felt quaint and charming now seems like a potential hiding spot. I find myself studying the walls, wondering what secrets they might hold. Sometimes I think about selling the house and starting fresh somewhere new. But then I remind myself that I can't let Frank win. This is my home now, and I won't be driven out by fear. So I stay vigilant, always watching, always listening, because I know that somewhere out there, Frank is doing the same. There was this one guy, Jerry, who lived in the unit right next to mine. From day one, something seemed off about him. He'd always be lurking in the hallway when I'd come home, staring at me with these intense, unblinking eyes. I tried to be friendly at first, smiling and saying hello, but he'd just mutter something under his breath and scurry back into his apartment. I didn't think much of it initially. Some people are just antisocial, right? But then things started to escalate. I'd come home to find weird notes taped to my door, cryptic messages scrawled in messy handwriting, stuff like, "I'm watching you," and "You don't belong here." I tried to brush it off as a bad joke, but it really started to creep me out. One night I woke up at like 3 a.m. to the sound of scratching at my door. When I looked through the peephole, I saw Jerry out there, just standing in the dark hallway and staring straight ahead. I was seriously freaked out, but I didn't want to confront him. I figured maybe he was sleepwalking or something. The next morning, I found deep gouges carved into my door. That's when I knew this wasn't just some harmless, eccentric neighbor. Jerry was seriously unhinged. I went to the building manager to complain, but they basically told me there was nothing they could do unless he actually threatened me. Over the next few weeks, Jerry's behavior got more and more aggressive. He'd pound on the walls at all hours of the night. I'd find my mail torn up and scattered in front of my door. One time I came home to find a dead bird nailed to my welcome mat. I was constantly on edge, afraid to leave my apartment or make any noise that might set him off. I tried reasoning with Jerry, asking him what his problem was with me, but he'd just glare and mutter, "You know what you did?" I had no idea what he was talking about. As far as I knew, I'd never done anything to offend him. Things came to a head about a month ago. I came home from work to find my door slightly ajar. My blood ran cold as I pushed it open. The inside of my apartment was trashed, furniture overturned, possessions smashed, walls covered in crazy scribbled writing. And in the middle of it all was Jerry, standing there with this maniacal grin on his face. I turned to run, but he lunged at me, tackling me to the ground. We struggled, and I managed to break free, locking myself in the bathroom. I could hear him rampaging through my apartment, smashing things and screaming incoherently. I called 911 with shaking hands, praying the police would get there in time. After what felt like hours, but was probably only about 15 minutes, I heard sirens and shouting in the hallway. The cops had arrived and were ordering Jerry to come out. There was more yelling, the sound of a scuffle, and then finally silence. When I emerged from the bathroom, my apartment looked like a war zone. Everything I owned was destroyed, but at least Jerry was gone. They'd taken him away in handcuffs. I found out later he'd been off his meds for months and was having some kind of psychotic break. I thought that would be the end of it. Jerry was locked up and I could finally breathe easy. But I was wrong. The nightmares started almost immediately. Vivid dreams of Jerry breaking into my room, standing over my bed with a knife. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, convinced he was actually there. Even though I knew Jerry was in jail, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. Every creak and groan of the building sent me into a panic. I started sleeping with the lights on, afraid of what might be lurking in the shadows. About a week after the break-in, I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange scratching sound. At first I thought it was just part of another nightmare, but as I became more alert, I realized it was coming from inside my closet. My heart nearly stopped. I lay there frozen in terror, hardly daring to breathe. The scratching continued, growing more frantic. Then I heard a low, guttural growl that made my skin crawl. It didn't sound human. Somehow I found the courage to get up and turn on the light. As soon as I did, the noises stopped. With trembling hands, I approached the closet. I don't know what I expected to find. Jerry somehow escaped from jail. A rabid animal? But when I flung open the door, there was nothing there, just my clothes and shoes, undisturbed. I convinced myself I must have imagined it, that it was just lingering trauma from what Jerry had done. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The feeling of being watched intensified. I'd wake up to find things in my apartment slightly out of place, as if someone had been moving around while I slept. The final straw came last night. I jolted awake around 2 a.m., that familiar sense of dread washing over me. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw a figure standing at the foot of my bed. My blood turned to ice. It was Jerry, or at least something that looked like Jerry. But its eyes were pitch black, its mouth stretched in an impossibly wide grin full of razor-sharp teeth. I scrambled backwards, falling out of bed in my panic. When I looked up again, the thing was gone. I turned on every light in the apartment, searched every nook and cranny, but found no sign of an intruder. The doors and windows were all still locked. I don't know how to explain what I saw. Maybe I'm going crazy. Maybe the trauma from what Jerry did has broken something in my mind. But I can't shake the feeling that something evil has latched onto me. Something that followed Jerry home that night. He ransacked my apartment. I'm writing this from a motel across town. I can't bear to go back to that apartment, not after what I saw. I don't know what to do or where to go from here. All I know is that I'm terrified of closing my eyes. afraid of what might be waiting for me in the dark. Will I ever feel safe again? Or am I doomed to be haunted by Jerry, or whatever that thing was, for the rest of my life? I'm sorry if this all sounds crazy. I needed to get it out, to tell someone what's been happening to me. If anyone has experienced anything similar or has any advice, please let me know. I'm desperate for help, for some way to make sense of all this. I just want my life back. I was exhausted after a long day at work when I finally arrived home. As I stepped through the front door, something felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The house looked immaculate as always. Mrs. Phillips had been here today for her weekly cleaning. I'd hired her about 2 months ago after my previous housekeeper retired, and she'd seemed like the perfect fit. Polite, thorough, and with glowing references. I tossed my keys on the entryway table and headed to the kitchen to grab a much-needed glass of wine. As I reached for a glass from the cabinet, I paused. Hadn't these been on the other side before? I shook my head, chalking it up to my exhaustion playing tricks on me. I poured myself a generous glass of red and settled onto the couch to unwind. As I sipped my wine, my eyes wandered around the living room. Everything looked pristine, but something still felt wrong. The throw pillows on the armchair seemed slightly askew from how I usually arranged them. The books on the coffee table were stacked in a different order. Little things that most people wouldn't notice, but it was my home. I knew how I liked things. I tried to brush it off. Mrs. Phillips probably just had her own way of organizing. No big deal, right? But as the evening wore on, more oddities kept catching my attention. My favorite mug wasn't in its usual spot by the coffee maker. The shower curtain was pulled to the opposite side. Even my bedside lamp seemed to be angled differently. By the time I crawled into bed that night, an uneasy feeling had settled in the pit of my stomach. I tossed and turned, unable to shake the sense that someone had been going through my things. But that was ridiculous. Mrs. Phillips was a professional with a spotless reputation. I was just being paranoid. The next morning, I woke up determined to put it out of my mind. I had a busy day ahead and couldn't afford to dwell on probably imaginary concerns. I rushed through my morning routine and headed out the door. Work kept me distracted most of the day, but as I drove home that evening, the nagging doubts crept back in. I found myself dreading what I might find when I walked through the door. Everything looked normal at first glance. I did a quick walkthrough of the house, half expecting to find something blatantly out of place. But nothing jumped out at me. I started to relax a little, thinking maybe I really had been overreacting. Then I opened my closet to change clothes. My heart nearly stopped. Several of my favorite outfits were missing. Not just misplaced, completely gone. I frantically searched every inch of the closet, then tore through the rest of the bedroom. Nothing. Over $1,000 worth of clothes had vanished into thin air. Panic rising in my throat, I grabbed my phone to call the police. But as my finger hovered over the dial button, I hesitated. What would I even say? I had no proof of a break-in, no signs of forced entry. For all I knew, I could have donated those clothes and forgotten about it. The police would think I was crazy. I spent a sleepless night alternating between convinced I was losing my mind and certain something sinister was happening. By morning, I'd made up my mind to set up a few hidden cameras before leaving for work. Nothing fancy, just a couple of small wireless ones I could monitor from my phone. If nothing else, it would give me peace of mind. The next few days passed in a fog of anxiety and sleep deprivation. I jumped at every notification on my phone, half expecting to see an intruder skulking through my house. But the cameras showed nothing out of the ordinary. Just Mrs. Phillips going about her cleaning routine on her scheduled day. I started to believe I really had imagined the whole thing. Maybe work stress was finally getting to me. I resolved to take a vacation soon and get my head on straight. Then came the day that changed everything. I was in a meeting at work when my phone buzzed with an alert from one of the hidden cameras. Excusing myself, I ducked into the hallway to check the feed. What I saw made my blood run cold. Mrs. Phillips was in my bedroom, but she wasn't cleaning. She was carefully going through my dresser drawers, examining each item of clothing before either replacing it or slipping it into a large bag at her feet. I watched in horror as she moved to my jewelry box, pocketing several pieces. My hands shaking, I called the police. I babbled out an explanation, praying they would take me seriously. To my immense relief, they assured me they were sending officers to my home immediately. I raced out of the office, my mind reeling. How long had this been going on? What else had she taken? The sense of violation was overwhelming. When I pulled up to my house, 2 police cruisers were already there. An officer approached as I got out of the car, asking me to wait outside while they secured the scene. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Phillips being led out in handcuffs, her face a mask of rage. What the police found inside was beyond my worst nightmares. Not only had Mrs. Phillips been systematically stealing from me for weeks, but she'd also installed hidden cameras and listening devices throughout my home. She'd been watching my every move, learning my routines, my habits, my life. But it got worse. In her cleaning van parked down the street, they discovered a veritable shrine to me. Photos taken through my windows, receipts and mail she'd fished out of my trash. Even a journal detailing her obsessive fantasies about taking over my life. The next few hours passed in a blur of police questioning and crime scene processing. I answered their questions numbly, still unable to process the full scope of what had happened. They assured me Mrs. Phillips would be going away for a long time, but it was little comfort. As the last police car finally pulled away, I was left standing alone in my driveway, staring at the house that no longer felt like home. The sense of safety and privacy I'd always taken for granted had been shattered. I couldn't bear to go back inside. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I got in my car and drove to a nearby hotel, my mind racing with all the ways my life had just irrevocably changed. Sleep eluded me that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mrs. Phillips rifling through my belongings, violating my personal space. I imagined her watching me through hidden cameras, planning God knows what. The next few weeks were a nightmare of paranoia and insomnia. I had the entire house swept for additional listening devices and cameras, changed every lock, installed a top-of-the-line security system. But none of it could erase the feeling of vulnerability that now permeated every aspect of my life. I jumped at every sound, scrutinized every stranger on the street, found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, convinced I was being watched. Work became nearly impossible. I couldn't focus, couldn't relax, couldn't trust anyone. My performance suffered and relationships strained as I withdrew into myself. Even after Mrs. Phillips was convicted and sentenced, the fear lingered. I knew logically that she was locked away, that my home was secure. But the damage was done. My sense of safety, of having a private refuge from the world, had been irreparably broken. Months have passed now, and I'm still struggling to put the pieces of my life back together. I've started therapy, which helps some days. I'm slowly regaining my footing at work, but I don't know if I'll ever feel truly at ease in my own home again. The experience has left me hypervigilant, always on guard. I find myself doing background checks on everyone I meet, triple-checking that doors are locked, hesitating to form new relationships for fear of letting someone else get too close. Some days I think about selling the house and starting fresh somewhere new. But I know the real problem isn't the physical space. It's the scars left on my psyche, the invisible wounds that may never fully heal. I share this story as a warning. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, don't ignore it, and be careful who you let into your life and your home. You never know what darkness may be lurking behind a seemingly innocent facade. I was just an ordinary guy looking for a new place to live. Little did I know that my search for affordable housing would lead me down a terrifying rabbit hole of crime, violence, and narrow escape. It all started when I found this too-good-to-be-true apartment listing online. The rent was surprisingly cheap for such a nice area, and the photos made the place look spacious and recently renovated. I should have known it was fishy, but I was desperate to find somewhere within my budget. I met the landlord, Mr. Johnson, to view the apartment. He seemed nice enough at first, middle-aged, well-dressed, soft-spoken. As he showed me around, I was impressed by how clean and modern everything looked. The kitchen had new appliances, the bathroom was spotless, and the bedrooms were a good size. "This is perfect," I told him. "How is it so affordable?" Mr. Johnson just smiled. "I like to keep good tenants happy," he said. "Are you interested in signing a lease?" I was ready to move in that day. We went through the paperwork. I handed over first month's rent and security deposit, and just like that, I had a new home. Mr. Johnson gave me the keys and told me to let him know if I needed anything. For the first couple weeks, everything was great. I settled in, got my furniture arranged, and started to feel at home. But then I noticed something odd. There was a door in the hallway that was always locked. I figured it was just a closet or maintenance area and didn't think much of it. One night, I woke up to some strange noises coming from behind that locked door. It sounded like shuffling and clanking, almost like someone was moving things around in there. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. I tried my keys on the lock, but none of them worked. I pressed my ear to the door, but couldn't make out anything distinct. Finally, I decided to ask Mr. Johnson about it the next day, but when I brought it up, he got weirdly defensive. "That's just for storage," he said curtly. "Nothing for tenants to worry about. Please don't try to access it." His reaction only made me more suspicious. What was he hiding in there? Over the next few days, I became obsessed with finding out what was behind that door. I started listening closely at night, trying to catch any sounds. I even considered trying to pick the lock, though I had no idea how. Then one afternoon, as I was coming home from work, I saw Mr. Johnson exiting the apartment with a large duffel bag. He looked startled to see me and quickly locked the door behind him. "Just doing some maintenance," he muttered before hurrying away. This was my chance. As soon as he was gone, I ran to examine the door. To my shock, it was unlocked. My heart pounding, I slowly turned the handle and peered inside. What I saw made my jaw drop. The room was filled with shelves and display cases packed with valuable-looking objects, ancient statues, ornate jewelry, rare coins, even what looked like Egyptian artifacts. My mind was reeling. Where did all this come from? As I looked closer, I noticed price tags and auction listings attached to many items. That's when it hit me. These were stolen goods. My landlord was some kind of high-end art thief. I started snapping photos with my phone, knowing I needed evidence. But as I was documenting everything, I heard a noise behind me that made my blood run cold. What the hell do you think you're doing? I spun around to see Mr. Johnson standing in the doorway, his face contorted with rage. Before I could react, he lunged at me and grabbed my phone, smashing it on the ground. "You nosy little shit," he snarled. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." I tried to run, but he was surprisingly strong for his age. He grabbed me by the shirt and slammed me against the wall. Stars exploded in my vision as my head cracked against the drywall. "Please," I gasped, "I won't tell anyone. Just let me go." But there was no reasoning with him. His eyes were wild with panic and fury. He started punching me in the face and stomach, each blow knocking the wind out of me. I crumpled to the floor, trying desperately to protect myself. "I'll teach you to mind your own business," he growled, kicking me repeatedly in the ribs. The pain was excruciating. I could taste blood in my mouth, and my vision was going dark around the edges. Just when I thought I was about to pass out, the assault suddenly stopped. I looked up to see Mr. Johnson staring at me with a mixture of rage and fear. "If you breathe a word of this to anyone, I'll kill you," he hissed. Then he turned and ran out of the apartment. For a few moments I just lay there in agony, struggling to breathe. Every inch of my body hurt. But I knew I had to get out of there fast. He might come back to finish the job. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I dragged myself to my feet. I staggered to my bedroom and grabbed my wallet and car keys. I didn't dare take the time to pack anything else. As I stumbled out to my car, I kept looking over my shoulder, terrified Mr. Johnson would reappear. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. But finally, I managed to start the engine and peel out of there. I drove for hours, putting as much distance between myself and that nightmare apartment as possible. When exhaustion and pain finally forced me to stop, I pulled into a rest area and collapsed in the back seat of my car. The next morning, my entire body was stiff and throbbing. My face was swollen and bruised, and it hurt to breathe. I knew I needed medical attention, but I was scared to go to a hospital. What if Mr. Johnson had connections and found out where I was? So I just kept driving, living out of my car and paying cash for everything so I couldn't be traced. I was paranoid that he might be looking for me, ready to silence me permanently if he found me. It's been months now, and I'm still looking over my shoulder. I lost everything I owned in that apartment: clothes, furniture, personal mementos, but I know I'm lucky to have escaped with my life. Sometimes I wonder what happened to Mr. Johnson and all those stolen artifacts. Did he flee? Did the police ever catch up with him? I'll probably never know. All I can do is try to move on and rebuild my life, hoping that my brush with a criminal mastermind is truly over. But I'll never feel truly safe again. And I'll certainly never trust a too-good-to-be-true apartment listing in the future. You never know what dark secrets might be hiding behind a locked door. I was desperate for a break from the chaos of city life, so I decided to rent a cozy cabin in the mountains for a week-long getaway. As soon as I arrived and breathed in the crisp mountain air, I felt my stress melting away. The cabin was everything I'd hoped for, rustic and charming, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. That first evening, I settled in with a good book and a glass of wine, relishing the peaceful silence. But around midnight, I was startled by a sharp knock at the door. My heart raced as I cautiously approached. Who could possibly be out here at this hour? I cracked open the door to find a disheveled man standing there, his eyes wild and unfocused. Before I could say anything, he blurted out, "What are you doing in my house?" His words sent a chill down my spine. Trying to keep my voice steady, I explained that I'd rented the cabin for the week. The man's face contorted in anger. "Impossible! I've lived here for years. You need to leave, now." He tried to push past me into the cabin, but I managed to slam and lock the door just in time. I listened as he pounded on the door and shouted incoherently for several minutes before finally going quiet. My hands shook as I called the rental company, desperate for answers. The woman who answered sounded confused by my story. She assured me that the cabin had been vacant for months and that I was the first renter in quite some time. When I described the man, she hesitated before saying, That sounds like it could be the previous tenant. But he disappeared over a year ago. No one's seen him since." A cold dread settled in my stomach. I begged the woman to send someone out to check on me, but she said the earliest they could get there was the next afternoon. I was on my own until then. I barely slept that night, jumping at every creak and rustle outside. As dawn broke, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I cautiously ventured outside, searching for any sign of the man from the night before. There were no footprints in the dirt around the cabin, no evidence anyone had been there at all. Had I imagined the whole thing? The lack of sleep and change of environment must have been playing tricks on my mind. I resolved to relax and enjoy the rest of my stay. But as night fell again, an uneasy feeling crept over me. I kept glimpsing movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. Shadows seemed to dance and shift in ways that defied explanation. I tried to distract myself by reading, but I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. My skin crawled as I imagined eyes boring into me from every darkened window. Around midnight, I heard it. A low, guttural moan that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. The sound came again, closer this time. Scraping noises above me, like something crawling across the roof. I scrambled for my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Panic rising in my throat, I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and huddled in a corner, eyes darting frantically around the room. The noises continued throughout the night, scratching, moaning, heavy footsteps circling the cabin. Several times I thought I saw a face pressed against the window, but it would vanish as soon as I looked directly at it. When morning finally came, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept at all, too terrified to let my guard down for even a moment. I burst out of the cabin as soon as it was light, gulping in the fresh air. In the harsh light of day, I felt foolish for letting my imagination run wild. There had to be a logical explanation for everything. Maybe some kind of animal had been prowling around. I was just tired and on edge after that weird encounter the first night. I spent the day hiking, trying to clear my head and reconnect with nature. By the time I returned to the cabin that evening, I felt much calmer. I was determined to enjoy the rest of my stay and not let paranoia ruin my vacation. But as night fell once again, the feeling of unease returned stronger than ever. The shadows seemed to grow and shift in unnatural ways. Every noise made me flinch. I decided to distract myself by exploring the cabin more thoroughly. Maybe I'd find something to explain the strange occurrences. As I poked around in a back closet, my hand brushed against something wedged behind an old trunk. I pulled it out, and my blood ran cold. It was a photo album, filled with pictures of the cabin. But in every single photo was the man who had appeared at my door that first night. The dates on the photos spanned decades. How was that possible? He looked exactly the same in all of them. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. The final photo showed the man standing in front of the cabin, grinning maniacally at the camera. Scrawled beneath in messy handwriting were the words, "I'll never leave." A floorboard creaked behind me and I whirled around, heart pounding. There in the doorway stood the man from the photos, looking exactly as he had that first night. But this time his eyes were pitch black, his grin impossibly wide. "Welcome home," he said in a voice that wasn't quite human. I scrambled backwards, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. None of this was possible. The man took a step towards me, his form seeming to flicker and distort. "You can check out any time you like," he rasped, "but you can never leave." I squeezed my eyes shut, desperately willing this all to be a nightmare. When I opened them again, the man was gone, but a bone-chilling laugh echoed through the cabin. The rest of the night passed in a blur of terror. Impossible things happened all around me. Furniture moving on its own, bloody messages appearing on the walls only to vanish moments later, glimpses of twisted, inhuman shapes in every shadow. Several times I tried to flee, but every time I stepped outside the cabin, I found myself immediately back inside, as if I'd never left at all. I was trapped in this nightmare, unsure what was real and what was in my mind. When morning finally came, I was cowering in the bathtub, barely clinging to sanity. As sunlight streamed through the windows, everything fell silent. I cautiously emerged to find the cabin looking completely normal. No sign of the horrors I'd witnessed. I grabbed my things and ran, not stopping until I reached my car. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For just a moment, I saw the man standing on the cabin's porch, waving goodbye with that terrible grin. I still don't know what really happened during my stay at that cabin. Was it all an elaborate hallucination? Some kind of shared psychosis with the missing former tenant? Or something far more sinister and inexplicable? All I know is that I'll never set foot in those mountains again. Some places are better left undisturbed, some doors better left unopened. Whatever dwells in that cabin, it's not of this world, and it's always hungry for new victims to join it in that endless, inescapable night. I had just moved into my new apartment and was excited to start fresh in a new city. The building seemed nice enough, a bit old, but well-maintained with friendly neighbors. At least that's what I thought at first. On my second day there, I ran into my next-door neighbor, Sarah, as we were both getting our mail. She seemed nice, if a bit overly chatty. She asked me all sorts of questions about where I was from, what I did for work, my schedule, etc. I didn't think much of it at the time and just chalked it up to her being friendly. But things started to get weird pretty quickly after that. The next morning, as I was leaving for work, Sarah popped out of her apartment the moment I opened my door. She commented on how early I was heading out and asked where I was going. I politely told her I had an early meeting and rushed off, feeling a bit uncomfortable. That evening when I got home, Sarah was in the hallway again. She made a comment about how late I was working and asked if I'd had dinner yet. I mumbled something about having leftovers and hurried inside, definitely creeped out now by her apparent monitoring of my comings and goings. Over the next few days, it seemed like Sarah was always there whenever I entered or left my apartment. She always had some comment about my schedule or activities. At first I tried to be polite, but it was really starting to unnerve me. How did she always know exactly when I was coming or going? About a week after I moved in, I came home one evening to find a small package outside my door. Curious, I brought it inside and opened it. To my horror, it contained several photos of me, entering and leaving the building, getting into my car, even walking down the street near my office downtown. There was a note that just said, "Thought you might want these." I felt violated and scared. Who had taken these photos? It had to be Sarah, right? But how was she following me all over the city without me noticing? I started to wonder if I was just being paranoid. Maybe it was an innocent gesture that came across creepy. I decided to confront Sarah about it the next day, but when I knocked on her door the following morning, there was no answer. I tried again that evening, and still nothing. I didn't see or hear from her for the next couple days. Part of me was relieved, but mostly I felt on edge, wondering where she was and what she was up to. After not seeing Sarah for nearly a week, I ran into our building manager in the lobby. I casually asked if he knew if Sarah was out of town. He gave me a confused look and said, "Sarah, there's no one named Sarah living in this building." My blood ran cold. I insisted that Sarah lived right next door to me in 4B. The manager shook his head and said that apartment had been vacant for months. He offered to come up and check it out with me. With shaking hands, I unlocked my door and let the manager inside. We went next door to 4B, and he used his master key to open it. To my shock, the apartment was completely empty. No furniture, no personal belongings, nothing. It looked like no one had lived there in ages. I stood there stunned as the manager looked around in confusion. He said he checked the rental records again, but was sure no one was leasing that unit. As he left, I collapsed onto my couch trying to make sense of what was happening. Had I imagined the whole thing? But then, how did I explain the photos? That night, I barely slept. Every little noise made me jump. I kept replaying all my interactions with Sarah in my head, wondering if I'd missed some obvious sign that she wasn't real. Around 3 a.m., I heard a noise in the hallway. Gathering my courage, I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but as I watched, a shadow moved across the far wall. It looked like a person, but distorted and elongated in a way that didn't seem human. I stumbled back from the door in terror. Suddenly my phone buzzed with a text. With trembling hands, I looked at the screen. It was from an unknown number and simply said, "Missing me yet?" I threw the phone across the room and huddled in the corner until morning, too terrified to move. When the sun came up, I frantically packed a bag and fled the apartment. I called the building manager from my car and told him I was breaking my lease effective immediately. He started to protest, but I hung up and just kept driving. I ended up staying with a friend for a few weeks until I could find a new place. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, terrified I'd see Sarah or receive more creepy messages. But nothing happened. Life eventually went back to normal, and I tried to convince myself it had all been some kind of mental breakdown from the stress of moving. But late at night, I still wonder, who was Sarah really? How did she seem to vanish into thin air, along with her entire apartment of belongings? And most unsettling of all, is she still out there watching me? I've never felt comfortable sharing this story before. Even now, part of me worries that putting it out there will somehow invite Sarah back into my life. But I need to know if anyone else has experienced anything similar. Am I crazy? Was it all in my head? Or is there some explanation for what happened that I'm missing? All I know is that I'll never forget those terrifying weeks in that apartment. The feeling of being watched constantly, of having my privacy invaded in such a personal way. Sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat, imagining I hear movement in the hallway outside my bedroom. I've moved several times since then, and I'm always extremely careful about getting to know my neighbors now. I keep to myself, and try not to reveal too much personal information. Maybe I'm being overly paranoid, but after what happened with Sarah, I don't think I'll ever feel truly safe in my own home again. If anyone out there has insight into what might have really been going on, I'm desperate to hear it. Was Sarah some kind of elaborate scam? A ghost? A figment of my imagination? I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head, and I still can't make sense of it. All I know is that I never want to experience anything like that again. For now, I'm trying my best to move on with my life and not let the fear control me. But a part of me will always be looking over my shoulder, wondering if Sarah is still out there somewhere, watching and waiting. The uncertainty is almost worse than anything else, never knowing if I'm truly safe or if she'll suddenly reappear in my life again someday. I hope that by sharing this, maybe I can find some answers or at least connect with others who've had similar experiences. Because the alternative, that I imagined the whole thing, is almost too frightening to consider. I need to believe that Sarah was real, even if I may never understand who or what she really was. So if you're reading this and it resonates with you in any way, please reach out. Maybe together we can make sense of these terrifying, inexplicable events. And maybe, just maybe, we can finally put the ghost of Sarah to rest, once and for all. I was so excited when I finally closed on my first house. After years of saving and dreaming, I had a place to call my own. A charming 1920s bungalow with hardwood floors and big windows. The first few weeks were a blur of unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. I felt so proud every time I walked up to my own front door and turned the key. But about a month after moving in, I started noticing little things that seemed off. At first it was just small stuff, a chair slightly out of place, or a cabinet door left open when I was sure I'd closed it. I brushed it off as forgetfulness from the chaos of moving. Then one day, I came home from work and found muddy footprints tracking across the entryway. My stomach dropped. I didn't own any shoes that could have made those prints. I did a careful search of the whole house, looking in every closet and behind every door. There was no sign of an intruder, but I felt deeply unsettled. I changed the locks that night and set up a basic security system. For a few days, everything seemed normal again. But then the strange occurrences started up once more. I'd wake up to find things rearranged, nothing major, just subtle shifts that most people wouldn't notice. But I knew my home, and I could tell when something wasn't where I'd left it. The creepiest incident was when I woke up one morning to find all the kitchen cabinets wide open. I knew for a fact I'd closed them before bed. The feeling of violation was overwhelming. This was my sanctuary, my safe place, and some unknown person was intruding on that. I felt constantly on edge, jumping at every little sound. Sleep became almost impossible as I lay awake straining to hear any sign of an intruder. I called the police, but without clear evidence of a break-in, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested I get security cameras, so I invested in a top-of-the-line system that covered every entrance and main living area. I felt a bit better knowing I'd be able to catch the creep on video. But the cameras never showed anything. No shadowy figure sneaking around, no signs of forced entry. Yet things kept moving and changing when I wasn't looking. It was maddening. I started to question my own sanity. Was I imagining it all? Maybe the stress of home ownership was getting to me? I tried to rationalize it away, but deep down I knew something was really wrong. The feeling of being watched was constant and oppressive. Even when I was home alone, the hairs on the back of my neck would stand up. like someone was right behind me, but I'd whirl around to find an empty room. One night I woke up suddenly, heart pounding. I wasn't sure what had startled me awake, but I had the overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone. I lay frozen in bed, barely daring to breathe as I strained my ears. Then I heard it, the faintest creak of a floorboard from down the hall. Panic flooded through me. This was it, proof that someone really was in my house. I wanted to run, to scream, to do something, but terror kept me paralyzed under the covers. I squeezed my eyes shut and silently prayed for whoever it was to just leave. The creaking steps came closer, agonizingly slow. They paused outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, certain that at any moment the door would burst open. But after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps retreated. I heard the stairs creak, then silence. I lay there for hours, too terrified to move. When the first light of dawn finally crept through my window, I made a mad dash for my car and sped to a friend's house. I was shaking so hard I could barely drive. My friend convinced me to call the police again. This time, they did a thorough search of the property, but once again, they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence anyone else had been there. The officer gently suggested I might want to talk to someone about anxiety or sleep disorders. I nodded numbly, but I knew what I'd heard. I couldn't bear to stay in that house another night. I packed a bag and checked into a hotel, telling myself I just needed a break to clear my head. But days turned into weeks, and I couldn't shake the dread I felt every time I thought about going back. Finally, I made the difficult decision to put the house on the market. I knew I'd take a loss selling so soon, but I couldn't live with the constant fear and uncertainty. As I packed up my belongings, jumping at every little noise, I kept expecting to find the intruder lurking in a closet or crawl space. But the house remained stubbornly, maddeningly empty. The day I handed over the keys to the new owners, I felt a mix of relief and guilt. Part of me wanted to warn them about the strange happenings, but I knew how crazy it would sound. I told myself it had all been in my head, just new homeowner jitters blown out of proportion. It's been a year now since I moved out. I'm in a new place, feeling settled and safe. But some nights I still bolt awake, certain I've heard footsteps in the hall. And in my darkest moments, I wonder if whatever was in that house has followed me here. I check the locks obsessively and sleep with the lights on. Deep down, I know it's not over. Whatever invaded my home and my peace of mind is still out there somewhere. And the thought that keeps me up at night is, what if it decides to come back? It all started about 6 months ago when I found this charming little cottage for sale in a quiet neighborhood just outside of town. The price seemed almost too good to be true for the area, but the realtor explained that the owners were going through a messy divorce and wanted a quick sale. I should have seen that as a red flag, but I was too blinded by the prospect of finally owning my own place. The day I moved in, I was on cloud 9. I spent that first weekend painting and getting everything set up just the way I wanted. But my excitement was short-lived. On Monday morning, I went out to check the mail and found a strange envelope with no return address. Inside was a crudely handwritten note that just said, "Get out." I tried to brush it off as a stupid prank, but it left me feeling unsettled. A few days later, another letter arrived. This one said, "You don't belong here." The handwriting was the same messy scrawl. I started to get worried and called the realtor to ask if she knew anything about it. She seemed surprised and said she'd look into it, but I never heard back. The letters kept coming, about 1 or 2 a week, each one more threatening than the last. I'm watching you. This is my house. You'll be sorry. I went to the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do without any real evidence of a crime. They suggested I install security cameras, which I did immediately. But things only escalated from there. One night I woke up to the sound of scratching at my bedroom door. My blood ran cold as I lay there frozen in fear, listening to the slow, methodical sound. When I finally worked up the courage to look, there were deep gouges in the wood, as if made by some kind of blade or tool. I started sleeping with a baseball bat next to my bed and checking all the locks obsessively. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and see nothing there. Other times I'd come home to find things slightly out of place, as if someone had been in the house. The final straw came about a month ago. I got home late one night after working overtime. As I approached my front door, I noticed something hanging from the knob. It was a small burlap doll, crudely stitched together. Pinned to its chest was a note that said, "Your time is up." I didn't even go inside. I got back in my car and drove straight to a hotel. The next day, I called a moving company and had them pack up all my stuff. I'm staying with a friend now while I try to figure out what to do next. I've tried to sell the house, but no one wants to touch it once they hear even part of the story. I've racked my brain trying to make sense of it all. Was it the ex-husband, angry about losing the house in the divorce? Some deranged neighbor? Or something even more sinister that I can't begin to comprehend? I may never know the truth. All I know is that my dream home became a waking nightmare, and I don't think I'll ever feel truly safe again. Sometimes I drive by the house late at night, half expecting to see a light on or a shadowy figure in the window. But it always sits there dark and empty, as if nothing ever happened. Maybe that's the scariest part of all, the not knowing. The feeling that at any moment it could all start again. I try to tell myself it's over, that I'm safe now, but deep down, a part of me is still waiting for that next letter to arrive. I had been living in this old apartment building for about 6 months when the strange noises from the basement started. At first, I tried to ignore them. Old buildings make all kinds of sounds, right? But as the weeks went by, the noises became more frequent and distinct. Shuffling footsteps, muffled banging, even what sounded like hushed voices at times. I mentioned it casually to a couple neighbors, but they just shrugged it off. The landlord was pretty hands-off and hard to get a hold of, so I didn't bother reporting it officially. But my unease grew. I started avoiding doing laundry at night, not wanting to go down to the basement alone after dark. One evening I was taking out the trash and decided to listen at the basement door for a moment. As I stood there straining my ears, I suddenly heard clear footsteps coming up the stairs inside. My heart started racing and I quickly backed away, not wanting to be caught eavesdropping if it was just the super or something. But as I retreated, the basement door swung open. A disheveled man I'd never seen before emerged, looking startled to see me there. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with wild gray hair and tattered clothes that hung off his thin frame. His eyes had a manic, feverish gleam that made my skin crawl. For a long moment, we just stared at each other in shocked silence. Then he grinned, revealing yellowed teeth. "Evening, neighbor," he said in a raspy voice. Before I could respond, he shuffled past me and out the back door of the building. I stood there frozen, my mind reeling. Who was this guy? He clearly didn't live in the building, at least not in any official capacity. The implications started sinking in. Had someone been secretly living in our basement this whole time? That night, I barely slept. Every creak and groan of the old building made me flinch. I kept imagining the strange man creeping around below, maybe even trying to break into apartments. By morning, I knew I had to investigate further. I waited until most people had left for work, then quietly made my way down to the basement. My hand shook slightly as I turned the door handle. To my surprise, it was unlocked. The musty smell hit me as soon as I entered. Dim light filtered in through the grimy windows. At first glance, everything looked normal. Washers, dryers, storage cages. But as my eyes adjusted, I noticed things that were off. A ratty sleeping bag tucked behind some boxes, food wrappers and empty bottles scattered in corners. My breath caught in my throat as I realized this confirmed my fears. Someone had definitely been living down here. I was about to leave and call the police when I heard a noise from the back of the basement. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. Silence, then shuffling footsteps. The man from last night emerged from the shadows, looking even more haggard in the dim light. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. "You can't live down here. This is trespassing." He cocked his head, studying me. "Says who? I've been here longer than you, boy. This is my home." "That's not how it works," I said. "You need to leave. I'm calling the police." As I reached for my phone, he lunged forward with surprising speed. His grimy hand clamped around my wrist. "You don't understand," he hissed. "I have a right to be here. They promised me. They said I could stay as long as I wanted." I tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. "Who promised you?" I asked, stalling for time as I tried to figure out how to escape. "The voices," he whispered, his eyes wild. "They speak to me through the pipes. They told me secrets about this place, dark things, things you couldn't handle knowing." A chill ran down my spine. This guy was clearly unhinged. I had to get out of there. "Okay," I said carefully. "I believe you. Why don't we go upstairs and talk about this? I'm sure we can work something out." He shook his head vehemently. "No, I can't leave. Bad things will happen if I go above ground. The voices warned me." I was about to try reasoning with him again when we both froze at the sound of the basement door opening. Footsteps on the stairs. "Hello? Is someone down here?" It was Mrs. Chen from the second floor. The man's grip loosened in surprise, and I wrenched my arm free. I bolted for the stairs, nearly colliding with a startled Mrs. Chen. "Call the police!" I yelled as I ran past her. "There's an intruder!" I didn't stop running until I was safely in my apartment, door locked behind me. My hands shook as I dialed 911. What followed was a blur of police interviews, neighbor gossip, and frantic calls with the elusive landlord. The cops did a thorough search, but found no sign of the man. He must have fled when he heard Mrs. Chen coming. They took my statement and said they'd increase patrols in the area. The landlord finally showed up and promised to change the locks on the basement door, but it all felt like too little, too late. That night, I lay awake listening to every tiny sound. Had the man really left for good, or was he still out there waiting for another chance to sneak back in? What if he tried to break into my apartment for revenge? Days passed and nothing happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling of violation and unease. I jumped at shadows and avoided the basement at all costs. Even with the new lock, I imagined the man finding some other way in, hiding in dark corners and watching us. I started looking for a new place to live almost immediately, but even after I moved, the experience haunted me. For months I'd wake up in a cold sweat imagining I heard shuffling footsteps outside my door. To this day, I'm hyper-vigilant about locking doors and windows. I can't shake the feeling that nowhere is truly safe. That man, or someone like him, could be lurking anywhere, just waiting for an opportunity to intrude on unsuspecting lives. I don't know if he ever came back to that old building. Part of me wonders if he's still there somehow, hiding in the walls, listening to the pipes. But mostly I try not to think about it. Some questions are better left unanswered. All I know is that I'll never look at a basement the same way again. You never really know what or who might be hiding in the shadows beneath your feet. I had just moved into my new apartment in the city a few weeks ago. It wasn't the nicest area, but the rent was cheap and I was trying to save money. At first, everything seemed fine. Sure, there were some shady characters hanging around the neighborhood, but I kept to myself and didn't have any issues. That all changed on a Tuesday morning as I was leaving for work. I noticed a disheveled-looking man sitting on the stoop of my building, mumbling to himself. I tried to squeeze past him without making eye contact, but as I walked by, he suddenly shouted, "Hey, that's my place you're living in." I was startled and glanced back at him, confused. "Excuse me?" He stood up, pointing an accusing finger at me. "You heard me. That apartment belonged to me before they kicked me out. You stole it from me." My heart started racing as I realized this guy was clearly unstable. I quickly walked away, pretending I hadn't heard him, but I could feel his eyes boring into my back as I hurried down the street. I tried to brush off the encounter, telling myself it was just some random crazy person. But over the next few days, I kept seeing the same man lurking around my building. Sometimes he would be across the street, other times right outside the entrance. He always seemed to be watching me. On Friday evening, I was walking home from the subway when I heard rapid footsteps behind me. Before I could react, a hand grabbed my shoulder roughly. I spun around to see the disheveled man, his eyes wild with anger. "Give me back my home," he screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. "You have no right to be there." I yanked away from his grip and started walking faster, my pulse pounding. "Leave me alone. I don't know what you're talking about." But he kept following me, shouting threats and accusations. "I'll make you pay for this. You can't hide from me forever." I practically ran the last block to my building, fumbling with my keys as I rushed inside. I slammed the door behind me, my hands shaking. Through the glass, I could see the man pacing back and forth on the sidewalk, glaring at me. That night, I barely slept. Every little noise made me jump, convinced the man had somehow gotten into the building. I kept imagining him breaking down my door in a rage. The next morning, I peeked out my window and saw him camped out on the stoop again. My stomach dropped as I realized I was basically trapped in my own apartment. I didn't want to risk encountering him again. I called in sick to work and spent the day anxiously pacing my apartment, checking the locks over and over. I debated calling the police, but what could I even tell them? That some random homeless guy was harassing me. I had no proof he'd done anything illegal. As evening fell, I was startled by a loud banging on my door. "I know you're in there," the man's voice shouted. "Come out and face me, you thief." I froze in terror, hardly daring to breathe. The pounding continued for what felt like hours, interspersed with his manic ranting. Eventually it stopped, but I still didn't move from my spot on the couch all night. This pattern continued for days. The man seemed to be constantly lurking around my building, waiting to confront me. I started having groceries delivered so I wouldn't have to go out. My work was getting suspicious of all my call-outs, but I was too afraid to leave. After almost a week of this, I was at my breaking point. I hadn't showered or changed clothes in days. Empty takeout containers littered my apartment. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. Gathering all my courage, I decided to make a break for it early Sunday morning when I hoped the man might be asleep. I threw some clothes in a backpack, planning to stay with a friend until I could figure out what to do. I crept down the stairs as quietly as possible, holding my breath with every creak of the old wooden steps. When I reached the ground floor, I paused to listen. Silence. Maybe I'd get lucky and he wouldn't be there. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the front door and stepped outside. For a moment, everything seemed clear. Then I heard a bellow of rage from my left. "There you are! Thought you could sneak away, huh?" I turned to see the man charging at me from the alley beside my building, his face contorted with fury. Panic exploded in my chest, and I took off running down the sidewalk, but he was faster than I expected. I could hear his ragged breathing right behind me as he gained ground. My lungs were burning and my legs felt like jelly, but terror kept me moving. Just as I felt his fingers grazing the back of my shirt, ready to grab me, I heard sirens approaching. A police car came tearing around the corner, lights flashing. 2 officers leapt out, quickly assessing the situation. "Stop right there!" one shouted, drawing his weapon. The man skidded to a halt, his hands raised. As the cops cuffed him, I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air and shaking uncontrollably. It turned out someone in my building had seen what was happening and called 911. The man was arrested for assault and trespassing. I later found out he had a history of mental illness and had been off his medication. Even though he was taken into custody, I couldn't shake the fear that gripped me. I kept imagining him showing up again, more enraged than ever. I ended up breaking my lease and moving to a new neighborhood, but I still have nightmares about being chased. To this day, I'm hyper-vigilant whenever I'm out in public. I'm always looking over my shoulder, worried that someone might be following me. That experience shattered my sense of safety in a way I'm not sure will ever fully heal. I know rationally that the odds of something like that happening again are low. But emotionally, I can't help feeling like danger is always lurking just around the corner. It's exhausting to live with that constant undercurrent of fear and anxiety. Sometimes I wonder if I could have handled the situation differently. Maybe if I'd contacted building management or the police earlier, it wouldn't have escalated so far. But in the moment, I felt paralyzed by indecision and fear. I've tried therapy to work through the trauma, but progress is slow. Certain triggers, like seeing homeless people on the street or hearing angry shouting, can still send me into a panic. I hate feeling so on edge all the time, but I don't know how to fully let my guard down again. The whole experience made me realize how quickly your sense of security can be shattered. One day you're going about your normal routine, and the next you're living in fear in your own home. It's a vulnerability I never want to feel again. I know I'm lucky that the situation didn't end even worse, but sometimes I still find myself looking at the locks on my door and wondering if they're really enough to keep me safe. I'm not sure I'll ever feel truly at peace in my own home again. The day started like any other hiking trip. I packed my gear, double-checked my supplies, and hit the trail early in the morning. The weather was perfect, crisp autumn air with a gentle breeze rustling through the colorful foliage. I planned to do a challenging 15-mile loop, spending one night camping before returning to my car the next day. For the first few hours, everything went smoothly. I maintained a steady pace, stopping occasionally to admire the breathtaking vistas and snap a few photos. But as the afternoon wore on, I began to feel uneasy. The trail markers seemed to be getting farther apart, and the path was becoming increasingly overgrown and difficult to follow. I pulled out my map and compass, trying to get my bearings. To my dismay, nothing looked familiar. The landmarks didn't match up with what I was seeing around me. A cold feeling of dread settled in my stomach as I realized I had somehow veered off the main trail without noticing. I tried backtracking, but only seemed to get more turned around. The trees all started to look the same, closing in around me. As the sun began to dip below the tree line, panic set in. I was lost in the middle of nowhere, with darkness rapidly approaching. My heart pounding, I pushed through the underbrush, desperate to find some sign of civilization before night fell. Just when I was about to give up hope, I spotted a small clearing up ahead. To my immense relief, there was a cabin nestled among the trees. It was clearly abandoned, with weathered gray boards and a sagging roof, but it looked sturdy enough to provide shelter for the night. I approached cautiously, noting the broken windows and door hanging off its hinges. Every instinct told me to stay away, but I knew I had no other choice. It was this, or sleep exposed in the woods. As I stepped inside, my skin crawled. Even in the fading daylight, I could see layers of dust and cobwebs coating every surface. Old furniture lay scattered about, a rusty bed frame, a toppled wooden table, a few crooked chairs. The floorboards creaked ominously under my feet. I set my backpack down and did a quick sweep of the cabin. It was a simple one-room structure with a small fireplace. No signs of recent habitation, which was both reassuring and unsettling. Who had lived here? And why had they left it to rot in the middle of the forest? As night fell, the temperature dropped rapidly. I gathered what dry wood I could find and got a small fire going in the hearth. The flames cast flickering shadows on the walls, making the cabin feel even more eerie. I kept imagining movement in the dark corners, though I knew it was just my nerves playing tricks on me. I tried to calm myself by going through my usual evening routine, eating some trail mix, filtering water, laying out my sleeping bag. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every few minutes, I'd whip my head around, certain I'd caught a glimpse of something in my peripheral vision. But there was never anything there. As I settled in for the night, exhaustion finally overtook my fear. I drifted off into an uneasy sleep, my flashlight clutched tightly in one hand. I'm not sure how long I slept before the noises started. At first, it was just the usual sounds of the forest at night. Wind in the trees, the hoot of an owl. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps. Slow, methodical footsteps crunching through the leaves outside. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, hardly daring to breathe. The footsteps circled the cabin once, twice, 3 times. Then they stopped directly outside the door. I could hear ragged breathing, as if something large was standing just on the other side of the flimsy wooden barrier. My heart was hammering so loudly I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. Seconds stretched into minutes as I waited in terrified silence. Just when I thought I couldn't take the suspense any longer, there was a long, low growl. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard before. Deeper and more guttural, almost human but not quite. I must have made some small sound of fear, because suddenly the creature outside went berserk. It threw itself against the door repeatedly, howling and snarling. The whole cabin shook with the force of its attacks. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag, pressing myself into the farthest corner from the door. The assault continued for what felt like hours. Occasionally, it would stop for a few minutes, lulling me into a false sense of security before starting up again with renewed fury. I was certain that at any moment the door would splinter and this unknowable horror would burst in. During one of the lulls, I heard a new sound that chilled me to my core. Whispers, faint, sibilant whispers coming from just outside the broken windows. I couldn't make out any words, but the cadence was unmistakably that of human speech. But how could that be? I was miles from any town or campground. The whispers grew louder, joining with the growls and howls in a cacophony of nightmarish sounds. I clamped my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut and praying for it to stop. I don't know how long I stayed like that, shaking and whimpering in the corner. When I finally opened my eyes again, pale dawn light was starting to filter through the windows. The noises had stopped. Cautiously, I crept to the door and peered out. The forest looked peaceful and still, with no sign of the terrors that had plagued me all night. I didn't wait around to investigate further. I grabbed my backpack and bolted, not even bothering to pack up my sleeping bag or other gear. I ran blindly through the woods, fueled by pure adrenaline and the desperate need to get as far away from that cabin as possible. By some miracle, I stumbled across a park ranger station after a few hours. The rangers were shocked by my appearance, clothes torn, covered in dirt and scratches, wild-eyed with fear and exhaustion. They told me I was over 20 miles off my intended route, in a part of the forest that was officially closed to hikers due to dangerous terrain. When I tried to explain what had happened, they exchanged worried glances. Apparently there were no known cabins or structures in that area of the park. They sent out a search team, but found no trace of the cabin I described or any unusual tracks or disturbances in the woods nearby. To this day, I don't know what really happened that night. Was it all a hallucination brought on by fear and exhaustion? Or did I stumble into something beyond human understanding? All I know is that I'll never hike alone again, and the sound of those inhuman growls and whispers still haunts my dreams. I was always drawn to the untamed wilderness, seeking out the most remote corners of nature to capture through my lens. As a nature photographer, I'd ventured into countless forests, but nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered deep in those woods last autumn. It was supposed to be a routine expedition, a week-long trek to photograph the vibrant fall foliage. I'd done my research, plotting a course that would take me far off the beaten path to areas rarely seen by human eyes. The first few days were uneventful, yielding some nice shots of mist-shrouded valleys and cascading streams framed by golden leaves. But on the fourth day, something changed. The forest grew denser, the shadows deeper. An eerie stillness settled over everything, broken only by the crunch of leaves under my boots. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, as if unseen eyes were watching my every move. I pushed deeper into the wilderness, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild in the isolation. That's when I stumbled upon the clearing. At first glance, it seemed like a natural opening in the forest. Shafts of hazy sunlight filtered through the canopy, illuminating a circular space maybe 50 feet across. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized, with growing horror, that this was no ordinary glade. Scattered throughout the clearing were dozens of sculptures. Except sculptures didn't seem like the right word for these nightmarish creations. They were constructions of bone and wood, twisted into impossible shapes that hurt my eyes to look at directly. The smallest were no bigger than a cat, perched on fallen logs or nestled in the undergrowth. Others towered over me, stretching 15 feet into the air on spindly legs of bleached bone. Ribs and vertebrae were woven into intricate lattices. Skeletal hands reached out imploringly. Grinning skulls, human and animal alike, leered from atop vertebral columns. My breath caught in my throat as I took in the grotesque display. Who or what could have created such abominations? The level of detail was astonishing. Each piece so meticulously crafted, it seemed to pulse with a dark vitality. I fumbled for my camera with trembling hands, knowing I needed to document this macabre scene. But as I raised the viewfinder to my eye, a wave of revulsion and terror washed over me. The sculptures seemed to shift and writhe in my peripheral vision. Shadowy forms darted between the trees at the edge of the clearing. My fingers wouldn't stop shaking long enough to press the shutter. I lowered the camera, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. That's when I noticed the silence. The forest that had been alive with birdsong and rustling leaves was now as silent as a tomb. An overwhelming sense of malevolent presence bore down on me. Whatever created these monstrosities was still here, watching, waiting. I could feel its hunger and hatred pressing against my mind like a physical weight. Panic overrode all rational thought. I turned and ran, crashing blindly through the underbrush. Branches whipped my face and thorns tore at my clothes, but I barely felt the pain. I just knew I had to get away from that nightmarish clearing. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes before I collapsed, gasping for air. As my racing pulse slowly steadied, reason began to reassert itself. I needed to get my bearings and find my way back to camp. But as I oriented myself using my compass and map, a chilling realization set in. According to my coordinates, I was only a few hundred yards from where the clearing should be. That was impossible. I'd run for miles in a blind panic. Curiosity warred with lingering terror. Part of me wanted to forget the whole thing and hike out of these God-forsaken woods as fast as possible. But I knew I'd always wonder if I didn't at least try to find the clearing again. I had to prove to myself that it was real. Moving cautiously, constantly scanning my surroundings, I backtracked to where the glade should have been. But there was nothing, just more trees and undergrowth. I searched in an ever-widening spiral for hours, becoming increasingly frustrated and unnerved. The clearing had vanished without a trace. There were no bone fragments, no trampled vegetation, nothing to indicate that the nightmare tableau I'd witnessed had ever existed. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I losing my mind out here in the isolation of the deep forest? As the light began to fade, I reluctantly made my way back to camp. I barely slept that night, startling at every snapping twig or rustle of leaves. The next morning, I packed up and hiked out, cutting my trip short by several days. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of some malevolent presence stalking me through the trees. In the weeks and months since, I've pored over maps and satellite imagery, trying to pinpoint the location of that clearing. I've even made a few return trips to the area, though never venturing as deep into the wilderness as before. But I found no trace of the bone sculptures or the glade that contained them. Sometimes I managed to convince myself that it was all just a vivid hallucination brought on by exhaustion and isolation. But in my darkest moments, usually in the dead of night, I remember the soul-deep terror I felt in that place. The memories are too visceral, too real to be mere fantasy. I don't know what I encountered out there in those remote woods. Part of me never wants to know, but another part can't let it go. The mystery haunts me, drawing me back like a moth to a flame. I'm planning another expedition soon, better prepared this time. If I find that clearing again, I'll have proof that I'm not crazy. But if I don't, well, I'm not sure which outcome terrifies me more. All I know is that those twisted sculptures of bone and wood have burrowed into my psyche, and I'll never be free until I uncover the truth behind their existence. So I'll keep searching, venturing deeper into the wilderness. But these days, I'm never quite sure if I'm the hunter or the hunted in those shadowy forests, and every time I raise my camera, I half expect to see those nightmarish creations leering back at me through the lens. I was so excited for our camping trip. My friends and I had been planning it for weeks, a chance to get away from the city, enjoy nature, and just relax around the campfire. We found this beautiful, secluded spot deep in the woods, about a 3-hour drive from home. It seemed perfect, peaceful, quiet, surrounded by towering trees and a babbling creek nearby. The first day was amazing. We set up our tents, went for a hike, spotted some deer, and spent the evening laughing and roasting marshmallows. As night fell, we were all feeling so content and at peace. If only I had known how quickly that peace would shatter. It must have been around midnight when we first heard them. Loud, drunken voices carrying through the trees, getting closer. At first we tried to ignore it. Probably just some other campers having a good time, we thought. But as the voices got nearer, I started to feel uneasy. There was an aggressive, angry tone that sent chills down my spine. Suddenly they burst into our campsite. 5 or 6 guys, maybe in their early 20s, clearly wasted out of their minds. They were yelling and laughing, kicking over our cooler, grabbing our food. We tried to stay calm, told them to please leave us alone. That just seemed to make them angrier. "What are you going to do about it?" one of them sneered, getting right in my face. I could smell the alcohol on his breath. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. My friend Jake tried to defuse the situation. "Come on, guys, we don't want any trouble. Why don't you head back to your own campsite?" For a moment, I thought it had worked. The guy took a step back, seemed to be considering it. Then his face twisted into a scowl. "You telling us what to do?" he snarled. Before we could react, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. The blade glinted in the firelight. Time seemed to stand still as we all stared at it in horror. "Now," he said, his voice low and menacing, "you're going to give us everything you've got. Wallets, phones, car keys, everything. I've never felt fear like that before. Pure primal terror that froze me in place. But some survival instinct kicked in, overriding the paralysis. "Run!" I screamed. We scattered in all directions, plunging into the dark forest. I could hear them shouting behind us, crashing through the underbrush. Branches whipped at my face as I ran blindly, my only thought to get away, get away, get away. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. My lungs were on fire, legs aching, but sheer adrenaline kept me going. Finally, I burst out onto a road. By some miracle, my friends had ended up in the same spot. We huddled together, gasping for breath, straining our ears for any sign of pursuit. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance. Without even thinking, we ran into the road, waving our arms frantically. The car screeched to a halt, an older couple inside looking at us in shock. "Please," I gasped out between heaving breaths. "Please help us. Some guys at our campsite, they have a knife." The woman immediately pulled out her phone to call 911 while her husband ushered us into the car. As we huddled in the back seat, the reality of what had just happened started to sink in. We were safe, but it had been so close. If we hadn't managed to get away, if that car hadn't come along. The police arrived quickly, lights flashing as they tore down the road towards our campsite. They took our statements, then insisted on escorting us to the nearest town. We spent the night in a cheap motel, too wired and terrified to sleep. The next morning, the police informed us they'd caught the guys. Turns out they were locals, known troublemakers who'd been causing problems in the area. They were facing serious charges. We were relieved, of course, but it didn't erase the trauma of that night. For weeks afterwards, I had nightmares about that knife, about running through the dark woods. Even now, months later, I still get jumpy at unexpected noises when I'm outside at night. I used to love camping, the peacefulness of being out in nature. But that night changed everything. The forest doesn't feel peaceful anymore. It feels threatening, full of hidden dangers. I know it's irrational, that what happened to us was a freak occurrence, but I can't shake the fear. We were lucky. So incredibly lucky. If we hadn't managed to escape, if that car hadn't come along when it did, I don't want to think about how differently things could have ended. It's a sobering reminder of how quickly a fun adventure can turn into a nightmare, how vulnerable we can be in isolated places. I'm trying to work through it, to not let this experience control my life. But it's hard. Every time I think about going camping again, I feel that same cold fear in the pit of my stomach. The rational part of my brain knows the chances of something like that happening again are tiny. But the part of me that lived through that terror isn't so easily convinced. For now, I'm sticking to day hikes in popular, well-trafficked areas. Maybe someday I'll feel comfortable spending the night in the woods again. But not yet. The memory of that night, of those angry voices and that glinting knife, is still too fresh. I know we were the victims, that we did nothing wrong. But I can't help replaying that night in my head, wondering if there was something we could have done differently. Should we have chosen a different campsite? Been more aware of our surroundings? Had some kind of weapon for protection? In the end, I know it doesn't really matter. We can't control the actions of others, especially those intent on causing harm. All we can do is be as prepared as possible and trust our instincts when something feels off. I'm sharing this story as a reminder to always prioritize safety, even when you're just out trying to have a good time. Be aware of your surroundings, trust your gut if something feels wrong, and have a plan in case things go south. It might seem paranoid, but after what we went through, I'd rather be overly cautious than caught off guard again. Despite everything, I'm trying not to let this experience make me fearful of the outdoors or of people in general. The vast majority of people we encounter, even in remote areas, are good. But it only takes one bad encounter to change everything. I'm grateful every day that we all made it out of those woods safely. It could have ended so much worse, and while the memory of that night still haunts me, I'm determined not to let it define me. One day, I hope to find that peace in nature again, to sit around a campfire with friends without constantly looking over my shoulder. Until then, I'll take it one day at a time, slowly rebuilding my confidence and sense of safety. If there's one thing I've learned from this experience, it's the importance of looking out for each other. My friends and I went through something traumatic together, and we've been there for each other every step of the way in the aftermath. That support has been crucial in helping us process and heal. So if you're planning a camping trip or any kind of outdoor adventure, remember to stay vigilant, trust your instincts, and always have each other's backs. The wilderness can be beautiful and rejuvenating, but it can also be unpredictable. Stay safe out there, and may your adventures be filled with only good memories. I was out for a solo hike on a crisp autumn morning, looking forward to some peaceful time in nature. The trail I chose wound through dense forest, far from the usual tourist spots. As I walked deeper into the woods, the only sounds were my footsteps crunching on fallen leaves and the occasional bird call. About an hour into my hike, I rounded a bend in the trail and saw something that made me stop in my tracks. There was a man lying on the ground about 20 feet ahead, partially obscured by some bushes. He was clearly injured. I could see blood on his shirt, and he was writhing around, muttering to himself. My first instinct was to run over and help, but something held me back. This far out in the wilderness, encountering a stranger in distress set off alarm bells. I cautiously approached, calling out, "Hey there, are you all right? Do you need help?" As I got closer, I could see the man more clearly. He looked to be in his 40s, with a scraggly beard and torn, dirty clothes. His eyes were wide with fear as they locked onto me. In a hoarse whisper, he said, "Thank God. Please, you have to help me. He's after me. The hunter. He's trying to kill me." I knelt down beside him, still wary, but seeing he was in genuine distress. "Who's after you? What happened?" The man grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "I was camping, woke up to gunshots. There's a man out there with a rifle, hunting people for sport. I've been running for hours. He shot me in the side. Please, we have to get out of here before he finds us." I looked at the wound in his side. It did look like a bullet graze, but his story seemed so far-fetched. Surely there couldn't actually be some maniac out hunting humans. The guy was probably delirious from blood loss and imagining things. "Okay, let's get you patched up and then we can figure out what's going on," I said, reaching for the first aid kit in my backpack. "I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation." A gunshot rang out, echoing through the trees. We both flinched. It sounded like it came from maybe a quarter-mile away. "Oh God, he's coming," the injured man moaned. "Please, we have to run." My heart was racing now. That gunshot had been very real. Could this insane story actually be true? I helped the man to his feet, letting him lean on me. "All right, let's move. My car's about 2 miles back down the trail. Think you can make it?" He nodded grimly. We set off as quickly as we could manage with his injury, me half carrying him as we stumbled down the path. Every snapping twig or rustle of leaves made us jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, straining to see any sign of pursuit. After about 10 minutes of tense hiking, we heard it. Footsteps crunching through the underbrush off to our left, moving parallel to the trail. They were steady and purposeful. Someone was definitely tracking us. "He's toying with us," the injured man whispered, "like a cat playing with its prey." I wanted to believe this was all some kind of misunderstanding, but a primal fear was taking hold. We picked up our pace as much as we could. The footsteps kept pace, sometimes fading, then growing louder again. Suddenly, another gunshot cracked through the air, much closer this time. A tree trunk splintered about 10 feet to our right. There was no denying it now. Someone was shooting at us. Adrenaline surging, I practically dragged the injured man into a run. We crashed through the woods, abandoning the trail in hopes of losing our pursuer. Branches whipped at our faces as we ran blindly through the undergrowth. I could hear heavy footsteps pounding behind us now. Whoever was chasing us was no longer trying to be stealthy. The injured man was gasping and stumbling more with each step. I knew we couldn't keep this pace much longer. Just as I was about to lose hope, I spotted a flash of metal through the trees, the railing of a wooden footbridge I recognized. We were almost back to the parking area. With a final burst of desperate energy, we sprinted for the bridge. 2 more gunshots rang out in quick succession as we reached the bridge. Splinters flew from the railing as the bullets struck. We didn't stop, practically sliding down the trail on the other side. Finally, mercifully, we broke out of the tree line into the gravel parking lot. My hands shaking, I fumbled with my keys and wrenched open the car door. I shoved the injured man into the passenger seat and dove behind the wheel. The engine roared to life, and I slammed it into reverse, tires spitting gravel. As we fishtailed onto the access road, I caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the woods, a dark figure holding what looked like a rifle, just standing there watching us go. We sped down the mountain road in tense silence, both panting heavily. After a few miles, the injured man spoke up. I can't believe we made it. Thank you. I thought I was dead for sure." I nodded, still too amped up to speak. My mind was reeling, trying to process what had just happened. Who was that man? Why was he hunting people? How many others had he killed? As the adrenaline faded, I noticed my hands were covered in blood from the man's wound. "We need to get you to a hospital," I said. He shook his head vehemently. "No hospitals. They ask too many questions. Just drop me in town. I'll find somewhere to lay low and patch myself up." I wanted to argue, but honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to try explaining this insane situation to the authorities either. So I drove him into town as requested, dropping him off behind a 24-hour laundromat. He thanked me again and limped off into the night before I could say anything else. I sat in my car for a long time after he left, trying to wrap my head around everything that had happened. Part of me still wanted to believe it had all been some kind of bizarre misunderstanding or shared delusion. But I knew deep down that the danger had been very, very real. In the weeks that followed, I scoured local news and missing persons reports, looking for any clues about the identity of our pursuer or other potential victims. But I never found anything conclusive. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but then I'll wake up in a cold sweat, the sound of those gunshots echoing in my mind, and I know it was all too real. I still go hiking occasionally, but never alone, and never on that particular trail. The woods don't feel like a peaceful escape anymore. Now, when I look into the shadows between the trees, I can't shake the feeling that something sinister might be looking back. It was a crisp autumn evening when I arrived at the secluded campsite deep in the national forest. The area was known for its rugged beauty and abundant wildlife, including black bears. I'd done my research and taken all the proper precautions. Bear spray at the ready, food stored securely away from my tent, and so on. As I set up camp and got a fire going, I felt that familiar excitement of being alone in nature, far from civilization. As night fell, I cooked a simple meal over the campfire and settled in to enjoy the starry sky and peaceful sounds of the forest. An owl hooted in the distance, and I could hear the soft rustling of small animals in the underbrush. It was exactly the kind of wilderness experience I craved. I crawled into my tent around 10 p.m., looking forward to an early start the next morning to explore some nearby hiking trails. Sleep came easily after my long drive to the campsite. I'm not sure what time it was when I first woke up, maybe 2 or 3 a.m., but something had disturbed my sleep, a sound that didn't belong. As I lay there in the darkness, straining my ears, I heard it again. A low, rumbling growl, much too close for comfort. My heart started pounding as I realized it had to be a bear, probably attracted by the lingering scent of my dinner. I knew I needed to make noise to scare it off, so I started loudly clapping my hands and yelling, "Hey, bear, go away!" For a moment there was silence. Then I heard heavy footsteps circling my tent. The bear was still there, and it wasn't leaving. I grabbed my flashlight and bear spray, my hands shaking. Taking a deep breath, I unzipped the tent flap and poked my head out. What I saw in the beam of my flashlight made my blood run cold. It wasn't a bear at all. Less than 20 feet away stood a massive gray wolf, its yellow eyes gleaming as it stared directly at me. And it wasn't alone. As I panned the flashlight around, I counted at least 5 or 6 more wolves surrounding my campsite. I'd never felt terror like that before. My mind raced, trying to remember if wolves were known to attack humans. But in that moment, faced with a pack of apex predators, all my wilderness knowledge seemed to desert me. I was frozen in fear. One of the wolves let out a spine-chilling howl, and that snapped me back to my senses. I knew I had to act fast. Scrambling out of the tent, I grabbed a burning log from the remnants of my campfire and waved it at the wolves, yelling at the top of my lungs. They backed up slightly but didn't run away like I'd hoped. I could see they were agitated, pacing back and forth, clearly seeing me as prey. The largest wolf, probably the alpha, took a few steps towards me, hackles raised. In desperation, I sprayed a blast of bear spray in its direction. The wolf yelped and shook its head, momentarily deterred, but the others were closing in. What followed was the longest, most terrifying hour of my life. I stayed on my feet, constantly moving, shouting, spraying bursts of bear spray, and swinging my flaming log to keep the wolves at bay. But they were relentless, testing me from all angles. I knew that if I showed any weakness or tried to flee, they would attack. My voice grew hoarse from yelling. My arms ached from wielding the heavy log. The bear spray was nearly empty. As my strength and resolve began to fade, I truly believed I was going to die there in the forest, torn apart by wolves. Just when I had almost lost all hope, I heard the most beautiful sound imaginable. A car engine in the distance. Someone was coming down the access road to the campground. The wolves heard it too, growing more agitated. Summoning every last ounce of energy, I screamed, "Help! Help me!" at the top of my lungs. The vehicle grew closer, and I saw headlights cutting through the trees. The wolves started to retreat, not wanting to risk an encounter with more humans. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, causing me to duck instinctively. The wolves scattered into the forest. As I looked up, I saw a forest ranger rushing towards me, rifle in hand. He had fired a warning shot to drive off the pack. I collapsed to my knees, overcome with relief and exhaustion. The ranger helped me to my feet, his face etched with concern. "Are you hurt? What happened here?" he asked. Through gasping breaths, I recounted my ordeal. The ranger explained that he was doing a routine patrol of the campground and hadn't expected to find anyone there this late in the season. If he hadn't come by when he did... I shuddered at the thought. As we drove back to the ranger station, the adrenaline began to wear off, and the reality of what I'd just survived started to sink in. I was alive, but forever changed. The wilderness I once saw as a sanctuary now held a darker, more primal energy that I couldn't ignore. The ranger informed me that wolf attacks on humans were extremely rare, and this pack's aggressive behavior was highly unusual. They planned to investigate further and potentially relocate the wolves if they continued to pose a threat to campers. I gave my official statement to the authorities, packed up my gear, and headed home. But I couldn't shake the lingering fear and trauma of that night. The glowing eyes of the wolves, their haunting howls, and the primal terror I felt, it all replayed in my mind constantly. It's been months since that night, and I still have nightmares about being surrounded by wolves. I haven't been camping since, and I'm not sure I ever will again. The experience taught me a harsh lesson about the raw power of nature and my own vulnerability in the face of it. I'm sharing this story as a warning to other solo campers and outdoor enthusiasts. Always be prepared, respect wildlife, and never take your safety for granted in the wilderness. I was lucky to survive my encounter, but I'll carry the mental and emotional scars with me forever. The forest I once saw as a peaceful retreat now feels like a place of hidden dangers. I know the odds of experiencing something like this are incredibly slim, but I can't help but wonder what other threats might be lurking in the shadows, waiting for an unsuspecting camper. It's a question that haunts me, and one I'm not sure I'll ever be able to answer. I was looking forward to a peaceful solo camping trip in the mountains, just me and nature for a few days. I'd found this secluded spot off the main trails that seemed perfect, a small clearing surrounded by dense forest with a babbling creek nearby. As I set up my tent that afternoon, I felt my stress melting away. The air was crisp and clean, birds were chirping, and I had the whole place to myself. I spent the day hiking and exploring the area, then returned to my campsite as the sun was setting. I got a fire going and sat back in my camp chair, enjoying the warmth and the stars coming out overhead. The forest was so quiet and still. I felt totally at peace. Around midnight, I decided to turn in. I put out the fire and crawled into my tent, quickly falling into a deep sleep. I'm not sure how much later it was when I jolted awake to the sound of voices and footsteps approaching my campsite. My heart started racing. Who could be out here in the middle of nowhere at this hour? I lay perfectly still, straining my ears. The voices got closer, and I could make out at least 3 or 4 different people. They weren't being particularly quiet. I heard a man's gruff voice say, "This looks like a good spot. Let's set up here." Set up? Here? Panic gripped me as I realized they intended to camp right on top of me. Should I call out and let them know I was here? But something felt off about the whole situation. Why would a group show up in the dead of night to make camp? I decided to stay quiet and hope they'd move on. But to my horror, I heard them start to unpack gear just feet from my tent. The voices were clearer now. "Did you grab all the supplies?" "Yeah, everything's here. Let's get the tarp up first. Keep it down. We don't want to attract attention." Attract attention? We were miles from anyone else. A chill ran down my spine. These weren't ordinary campers. I lay frozen in fear, hardly daring to breathe. After about 30 minutes, things quieted down. They must have finished setting up. I heard the crack of a beer can opening, followed by low murmurs of conversation I couldn't quite make out. My mind was racing. Who were these people? What were they doing out here? I knew I needed to get out of there, but how? My car was parked about a mile down the trail. Could I sneak away in the dark without them noticing? I decided I had to try. Moving as slowly and quietly as possible, I slipped out of my sleeping bag and put on my shoes. I unzipped the tent just a crack and peered out. In the faint moonlight, I could make out several dark shapes moving around a small fire. They seemed preoccupied with whatever they were doing. This was my chance. Heart pounding, I eased out of the tent and began to crawl away on my hands and knees. I had only gone about 10 feet when I heard a shout, "Hey! There's someone over there!" Panic exploded through me. I leapt to my feet and took off running blindly into the dark forest. Behind me I heard angry yells and the sounds of pursuit. Branches whipped my face as I crashed through the underbrush. I had no idea where I was going, just desperately trying to put distance between me and my pursuers. Their shouts seemed to be getting closer. "Stop him! Don't let him get away!" I pushed myself to run faster than I ever had in my life. My lungs were burning and my legs felt like jelly, but pure adrenaline kept me going. Suddenly the ground dropped away beneath my feet. I tumbled head over heels down a steep slope, bouncing off rocks and tree roots. I came to a stop at the bottom, dazed and in pain, but I could still hear them coming. Groaning, I forced myself up and stumbled onward. The fall had disoriented me, and I had no idea which direction I was going anymore. The voices behind me were fading, but I didn't dare slow down. I don't know how long I ran for. It felt like hours. Eventually I realized I couldn't hear anyone chasing me anymore. I slowed to a walk, gasping for air. Every part of my body ached from the fall and the frantic escape through the woods. As the sky began to lighten with the approaching dawn, I found myself on the shore of a small lake. I didn't recognize it at all. I had no idea where I was or how far I'd come. But I was alive. I collapsed on the rocky beach, utterly spent. As the sun rose, I took stock of my situation. I was lost in the wilderness with no supplies, no phone, and no idea which way to go. But I was also free of whatever sinister thing I'd stumbled upon at my campsite. I ended up following the lake shore until I came across some cabins. The owners called the park rangers, who helped me get back to my car. I never reported what happened that night. Who would believe me? To this day, I have no idea who those people were or what they were doing out there. But the terror of that night still haunts me. I've never been camping alone again. The first couple days were amazing. Crisp air, towering trees, not another soul in sight. I felt so alive and free. On the third day, things started getting weird. I could have sworn I passed the same distinctive rock formation twice, even though I'd been hiking in a straight line all day. The forest seemed to shift and change around me in subtle ways I couldn't quite put my finger on. As night fell, an unnatural fog rolled in. The darkness felt oppressive, almost alive. My headlamp barely penetrated a few feet ahead. That's when I heard it, a low, rumbling growl that didn't sound like any animal I knew. My heart started racing. I told myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something was very wrong. I pushed on, desperate to find my way back to a trail or campsite. Suddenly, the trees opened up into a clearing I hadn't seen before. What I saw there made my blood run cold. A circle of ancient stone pillars loomed out of the mist, covered in strange symbols that hurt my eyes to look at. They seemed to glow faintly with an otherworldly light. As I stood there frozen, trying to process what I was seeing, movement caught my eye. Dark, writhing shapes emerged from the shadows between the pillars. They were vaguely humanoid, but their forms kept shifting and changing in ways that defied logic. Tendrils of inky blackness reached out towards me. Panic exploded in my chest. I turned and ran blindly into the forest, branches whipping my face. I could hear them pursuing me, their unholy shrieks echoing through the trees. The forest itself seemed alive, roots reaching up to trip me, branches bending to block my path. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning. At some point I realized the sounds of pursuit had faded, but I was hopelessly lost. The stars overhead were all wrong. Constellations I'd never seen before wheeled across the sky at impossible speeds. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, I burst out of the tree line into a moonlit meadow. Ethereal beings of pure light hovered there, their presence filling me with a profound sense of peace and wonder. But it was fleeting. In a blink they vanished, and I was alone again. Dawn broke, but it brought no comfort. The sun rose and set multiple times in the span of what felt like minutes. I wandered in a daze, my mind struggling to make sense of what was happening. Reality itself seemed to be breaking down around me. After what seemed like an eternity, I heard voices, human voices. A search and rescue team found me, dehydrated and delirious. Apparently I'd been missing for over a week and had somehow ended up hundreds of miles from where I started. The news reports called it a miraculous survival story. But I know the truth. Something is out there in those woods, something that defies explanation. Since that day, I've never been the same. I see shadows moving in the corner of my eye. Strange symbols appear in my dreams. The world feels thin somehow, like a veil that could tear at any moment. I try to go about my normal life, but it's hard. How do you just go back to being an IT specialist when you've glimpsed the terrifying reality that lurks just beyond human perception? Sometimes I wonder if I ever really made it out of those woods at all. I know one thing for certain. I'll never set foot in another forest as long as I live. The primal, childhood fear of the dark was right all along. There are things out there in the shadows, ancient and alien things that we were never meant to encounter. And once you've seen them, you can never unsee them. I'm sharing this as a warning. Be careful out there in the wilderness. If you ever find yourself lost in a forest that doesn't feel quite right, if you come across anything that doesn't belong, run. Run as fast and as far as you can. And pray that whatever is out there doesn't take an interest in you. Because trust me, there are fates far worse than being lost in the woods. I've seen them with my own eyes, and the memory will haunt me for the rest of my days. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway, just me and nature. At 70 years old, I figured I'd earned some solitude after years of dealing with claims and paperwork. I packed my gear, said goodbye to my wife, and headed out to the mountains I'd known since childhood. The first 2 days were uneventful. I hiked, fished, and enjoyed the crisp mountain air. On the third day, everything changed. I was following a small stream, looking for a good spot to refill my water bottle, when I saw something white glinting in the water. At first, I thought it was just a piece of driftwood, but as I got closer, my blood ran cold. It was unmistakably a human skull. My hands shaking, I reached into the water and pulled it out. The bone was smooth and weathered, clearly having been there for years. I scanned the area and spotted more bones scattered along the stream bed. My mind raced. Was this a crime scene? An old burial ground? I knew I should probably alert the authorities, but something held me back. An inexplicable feeling came over me, as if these bones were meant for me to find. As I contemplated what to do, I heard voices approaching. 2 hikers, a man and a woman, came into view. They looked to be in their 30s, dressed in high-end hiking gear. Something about them seemed off. Their movements were too fluid, their smiles too perfect. They asked what I was doing, and I found myself lying, saying I was just admiring the stream. They exchanged a knowing look that sent chills down my spine. "Be careful in these woods, old-timer," the man said, his voice carrying an odd resonance. "There are ancient things here that don't take kindly to intruders." Before I could respond, they were gone, disappearing into the trees as if they'd never been there at all. I blinked, wondering if I'd imagined the whole encounter, but the skull in my hands was all too real. As night fell, I made camp, but sleep eluded me. The forest seemed alive in a way I'd never experienced before. Shadows danced at the edge of my campfire's light, and whispers carried on the wind. I told myself it was just my imagination running wild after the day's strange events. But deep down, I knew something extraordinary was happening. Around midnight, I gave up on sleep and decided to take a walk to clear my head. The full moon bathed the forest in an ethereal glow, casting long shadows across the ground. As I wandered, I felt drawn to a small clearing I hadn't noticed before. In the center stood an ancient, gnarled tree, its trunk easily 20 feet wide. As I approached the tree, the air around me seemed to thicken. The moonlight intensified, focusing on the tree like a spotlight. And then, impossibly, the trunk began to move. Bark split and twisted, forming what looked like a face, ancient, wise, and undeniably alive. I wanted to run, to scream, to wake up from what must surely be a dream. But I was rooted to the spot, unable to look away as the tree's eyes opened, glowing with an inner light. "Joseph Wilson," it spoke, its voice like the creaking of branches in the wind. "You have been chosen." I found my voice, small and trembling. "Chosen? For what?" "To become a guardian," the tree replied. "To protect the balance between humanity and nature." The clearing filled with a soft, pulsing light. Shapes emerged from the shadows. Other trees, rocks, even the very air itself seemed to coalesce into vaguely humanoid forms. I realized, with a start, that these were the true guardians of the forest, ancient spirits that had watched over this land for millennia. The tree spirit continued, its words reverberating through my very being. "Humanity stands at a crossroads. Your kind's disregard for the natural world threatens not just your own existence, but the very fabric of life itself. We have chosen you, Joseph, along with others like you, to carry our message and help prevent the coming catastrophe." Images flashed through my mind. Forests burning, oceans choked with plastic, animals dying in droves. I saw storms of unprecedented fury, droughts that turned fertile land to dust, and floods that swallowed entire cities. But I also saw hope, people coming together, planting trees, cleaning rivers, and living in harmony with the land. "Why me?" I managed to ask, overwhelmed by the weight of what I was being told. The tree's face softened into what might have been a smile. "You have lived a life of balance, Joseph. You understand the need for rules and order, but you also respect the wild and unpredictable nature of the world. Your heart is open, your mind willing to believe. You are a bridge between worlds." The other spirits moved closer, forming a circle around me. The tree spoke again, its voice now joined by a chorus of whispers. "Do you accept this responsibility, Joseph Wilson? Will you become a guardian of the natural world?" In that moment, all my doubts and fears fell away. I thought of my grandchildren, of the world they would inherit if nothing changed. I thought of the beauty I'd seen in these mountains and how it deserved to be protected. Without hesitation, I nodded. "I accept," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in years. The spirits began to move, swirling around me in a dizzying dance of light and shadow. I felt energy coursing through me, ancient and powerful. Knowledge flooded my mind. The language of trees, the songs of rivers, the whispers of the wind. I saw the interconnectedness of all things, the delicate balance that held the world together. When it was over, I found myself alone in the clearing once more. The tree had returned to its normal state, but I could still feel its presence, along with the other guardians, watching over me. As the sun began to rise, I made my way back to my campsite, forever changed. It's been a month since that night, and I'm still processing everything that happened. I've retired from my job at the insurance company, much to everyone's surprise. Instead, I've thrown myself into environmental activism, using my new knowledge and the connections I've made to push for real change. Some days I wonder if it was all a vivid dream or hallucination, but then I'll catch a glimpse of a tree waving in a way that's just a little too deliberate, or I'll hear a whisper on the wind that sounds like my name. And I know, deep in my bones, that what happened in those mountains was real. I'm not sure why I'm sharing this story. Maybe it's part of my new role as a guardian, spreading the message to those who might listen. Or maybe I just need to get it off my chest. All I know is that our world is in danger, and it's up to all of us to protect it. The guardians can only do so much. The rest is up to humanity. So the next time you're in nature, really look at the world around you. Listen to the trees. Feel the earth beneath your feet. You might just hear them whispering, calling out for help. And who knows, you might be the next one chosen to become a guardian. I was a forest ranger in Angeles National Forest for about 3 years before everything went to hell. Before that, I spent most of my life hunched over a computer as an IT specialist in Los Angeles. But I always felt drawn to nature, you know. There's something about the quiet of the forest that just speaks to me. So when I hit my mid-30s, I decided to make a radical career change. Traded in my ergonomic office chair for hiking boots and a ranger uniform. For the most part, I loved it. Fresh air, beautiful scenery, and a sense of purpose protecting the wilderness. But all that changed last month during what should have been a routine patrol. It was a crisp autumn morning when I set out to check on some of the more remote campsites. We'd had reports of a few hikers going missing over the past couple weeks, so I was on high alert. As I made my way deeper into the forest, something felt off. The usual ambient sounds of birds and small animals were oddly muted. I arrived at the first campsite to find it completely abandoned. Tents were still up, gear was strewn about, but there wasn't a soul in sight. It looked like the campers had just vanished into thin air. My skin crawled as I radioed it in to dispatch. As I investigated the scene, I noticed some strange tracks in the soft dirt near the edge of the clearing. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Huge, misshapen footprints that seemed to change slightly with each step. Sometimes they looked almost human-like, other times more animal. I snapped some photos and decided to follow the trail. The tracks led me deeper into a part of the forest I'd never explored before. The trees grew denser, blocking out most of the sunlight. An eerie mist clung to the forest floor. Every instinct told me to turn back, but my curiosity and sense of duty pushed me forward. After about an hour of careful tracking, I came to a small clearing. What I saw there will haunt me for the rest of my days. Hunched in the center of the clearing was something. At first glance, it almost looked human, bipedal, roughly 7 feet tall. But as it turned to face me, I realized how horribly wrong I was. Its skin was a sickly grayish-green color, mottled and stretched tight over a twisted frame. Long, spindly arms ended in hands tipped with wicked claws. But it was the face that made my blood run cold. Where eyes should have been, there were only smooth indentations in the skin, and its mouth, dear God, its mouth. Rows upon rows of needle-like teeth filled a maw that split its face nearly in half when it opened. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I was frozen in terror, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Then it let out a sound, not quite a roar, not quite a scream, but something in between that set every nerve in my body on fire. I ran faster and harder than I ever have in my life. Branches whipped at my face as I tore through the underbrush, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear it crashing through the forest behind me, gaining ground with inhuman speed. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning as pure survival instinct took over. Eventually, I spotted an enormous old-growth tree ahead. As I got closer, I noticed a small opening at the base, barely big enough for a person to squeeze through. Without thinking, I dove for the opening. I scrambled inside, finding myself in some kind of hollow chamber within the massive trunk. It was dark and damp, with strange phosphorescent fungi providing dim illumination. I pressed myself against the far wall, trying to quiet my ragged breathing. Outside, I could hear the creature circling the tree, sniffing and scratching at the bark. My hand closed around a hefty fallen branch on the ground beside me. Suddenly, a clawed hand thrust through the opening, grasping blindly. In a surge of desperate adrenaline, I swung the branch with all my might. There was a sickening crunch as it connected, and the hand withdrew with a shriek of pain. What followed was a nightmarish blur of violence. The creature kept reaching in, trying to drag me out. I kept swinging again and again until my arms felt like lead. The sounds it made, they weren't of this world. Not animal, not human, but something else entirely. I don't know how long the assault lasted. Eventually, the attacks grew weaker, more sporadic. With one final, pitiful moan, the creature went silent. I waited for what felt like hours, ears straining for any sign of movement outside. When I finally gathered the courage to peer out of my refuge, there was no sign of the monster, just a trail of strange, thick ichor leading away into the forest. Had I actually managed to kill it, or had it simply retreated to lick its wounds? I made my way back to base camp in a daze, my mind reeling. I knew I should report what happened, but who would believe me? I could barely believe it myself. In the end, I said I'd found signs of animal attacks at the missing camper's site, but nothing conclusive. I quit my job as a ranger the next day. Couldn't bear the thought of going back into those woods. Now I'm back in the city, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I swear I see a tall, misshapen figure. But when I turn to look, there's nothing there. I don't know what that thing was. Some kind of cryptid? An alien? A demon? All I know is that it shouldn't exist. It goes against everything we understand about biology and physics. And yet I saw it with my own eyes, felt its claws tearing at my clothes as I fought for my life. I can't stop thinking about those missing hikers. Did they encounter the same creature? Are there more of them out there? The thought keeps me up at night. I'm sharing this story as a warning. Be careful out there in the wilderness. There are things in this world that defy explanation, things that exist in the shadows between what we know and what we fear, and sometimes they come out to hunt. I don't know if I killed that monster in the hollow tree. Part of me hopes I did, but a larger part of me is terrified that it's still out there somewhere waiting, watching. And maybe, just maybe, it followed me home. I was an Army veteran, used to the harsh realities of life, but nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered in the Kansas wilderness. It all started on what should have been a routine bird migration hike with my buddy Mike. We'd been planning this trip for weeks, excited to witness the spectacle of thousands of birds making their journey south. The day began like any other outdoor excursion. We set out early, the crisp autumn air filling our lungs as we trekked through the dense forest. The chirping of birds and the rustling of small animals in the underbrush created a peaceful ambience. Mike and I chatted about our lives, our families, and our shared love for nature. As we reached a clearing, something changed. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but then it hit me. The silence. It was as if someone had suddenly muted the world around us. The birds stopped singing, the insects ceased their incessant buzzing, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. An eerie stillness enveloped us, sending a chill down my spine. I turned to Mike, about to ask if he noticed the strange quiet, when I heard it. A blood-curdling scream pierced the air, so loud and visceral it felt like it was coming from inside my own head. It was unmistakably a woman's voice, filled with terror and agony. I spun around, my heart racing, trying to locate the source of the horrifying sound. "Did you hear that?" I asked Mike, my voice trembling. He looked at me, confused. "Hear what, John?" I couldn't believe it. How could he not have heard that scream? It was so loud, so real. I described what I'd heard, but Mike just shook his head, concern growing on his face. "Maybe it was just the wind," he suggested, but I could tell he didn't believe it himself. We decided to head back, the pleasant hike now tainted by an inexplicable sense of dread. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves made me jump. The forest that had seemed so inviting just hours ago now felt oppressive and threatening. That night, I couldn't sleep. The scream echoed in my mind, and I found myself researching similar experiences online. That's when I stumbled upon the legend of the Wendigo, a terrifying creature from Native American folklore. The more I read, the more convinced I became that this was what I had encountered. The Wendigo, according to the legends, was a malevolent spirit that possessed humans, turning them into cannibalistic monsters. It was said to mimic human voices, luring unsuspecting victims deep into the wilderness. The description sent shivers down my spine as I remembered the woman's scream I'd heard. Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened in the forest. I started having nightmares, vivid dreams of being chased through dark woods by an unseen predator. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the echo of that scream still ringing in my ears. I knew I had to go back. I had to find answers. Despite Mike's protests and my family's concerns, I began planning another trip to the area. This time, I was going alone. I packed camping gear, a high-quality camera, and enough supplies for a week-long expedition. The day I set out, I felt a mix of excitement and fear. As I drove towards the forest, the rational part of my mind tried to convince me that I was chasing shadows, that there was a logical explanation for what I'd experienced. But deep down, I knew something extraordinary awaited me. I hiked for hours, deeper into the wilderness than Mike and I had ever ventured. As night fell, I set up camp in a small clearing, my senses on high alert. Every sound made me tense, my hand instinctively reaching for the hunting knife at my belt. It was on the third night that it happened. I was huddled by my campfire, the flames casting flickering shadows on the surrounding trees, when I heard it again, that same haunting scream. This time, it was closer, much closer. I grabbed my camera and flashlight, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I followed the sound, moving cautiously through the darkness. The beam of my flashlight danced across the trees, creating monstrous shapes in the shadows. Then I saw it, a figure, hunched and inhuman, darting between the trees. It moved with an unnatural speed and grace, always just at the edge of my vision. I chased after it, all caution forgotten in my desperation to capture evidence of what I was seeing. The creature led me on a terrifying chase through the forest, always staying just out of reach. I stumbled over roots and crashed through undergrowth, driven by an almost manic need to prove I wasn't crazy. Finally, I found myself at the mouth of a cave. The entrance yawned before me, a black void that seemed to swallow all light. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I couldn't. I had come too far. With shaking hands, I turned on my camera and began to record. "If anyone finds this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I want you to know what happened here." I stepped into the cave, the beam of my flashlight barely penetrating the oppressive darkness. The air was thick and musty, filled with an odor I couldn't quite place. As I ventured deeper, I heard something, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from the very walls of the cave. Suddenly, my flashlight flickered and died. In that moment of complete darkness, terror gripped me like never before. I fumbled with the camera, switching it to night vision mode. What I saw through the green-tinted screen will haunt me for the rest of my days. A creature, tall and emaciated, with antler-like protrusions jutting from its skull, stood mere feet away from me. Its skin was a patchwork of human and animal hide, stretched tight over an impossibly thin frame. But its eyes, God, its eyes, they glowed with an otherworldly hunger that froze me to the spot. I screamed, the sound echoing off the cave walls. The creature lunged at me with inhuman speed. I felt a searing pain as its claws raked across my chest. I stumbled backward, losing my footing on the uneven cave floor. As I fell, I saw the creature looming over me, its jaws opening to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. In that moment, I knew I was going to die. The camera tumbled from my grasp, landing on a rock with the lens still pointed at me. The last thing the video captured was my agonized scream as the Wendigo descended upon me. I don't know how I survived. I don't know how I escaped that cave or made it back to civilization. The next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital bed, my body covered in bandages and my mind struggling to make sense of what had happened. The authorities found my campsite and the camera, but the footage was corrupted beyond recovery. They attributed my injuries to a bear attack, but I know the truth. I know what I saw in that cave. Even now, months later, I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I swear I can hear that scream again, calling me back to the forest. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I catch a glimpse of something inhuman in my own eyes, and I wonder, did I truly escape, or did I bring something back with me from that cave? I'm sharing this story as a warning. There are things out there in the wilderness that defy explanation, things that lurk in the shadows of our world. If you ever find yourself alone in the forest and hear a woman scream, don't follow it. Run. Run as fast and as far as you can, because the Wendigo is real and it's always hungry. I was so excited when I got the job as a camp counselor for the summer. As a 19-year-old biology major, spending my break in the wilderness of West Virginia sounded perfect. Whispering Pines Preserve was gorgeous. Lush forests, sparkling streams, and a massive misty marsh that stretched as far as the eye could see. The first few weeks were great. I loved working with the kids, teaching them about local plants and wildlife. My favorite part was leading the night hikes to observe nocturnal animals. That's what we were doing that night. Just me and 10-year-old Lucas creeping through the woods with our red-filtered flashlights. Lucas was a quiet, thoughtful kid who loved nature. As we walked, he peppered me with questions about owls and raccoons. I was in my element, sharing my knowledge and watching his eyes light up. We paused to listen to a pair of barred owls calling to each other, their haunting "Who cooks for you?" echoing through the trees. That's when things started to feel off. The forest went completely silent. No crickets, no frogs, nothing. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I told myself I was being silly, but I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. "Ethan," Lucas whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "What's that smell?" I sniffed the air and nearly gagged. It was like rotting meat and stagnant water. "Probably just the marsh," I said, trying to sound casual. "Let's head back to camp." We turned around, and that's when I saw it. At first I thought it was just shadows playing tricks on my eyes, but as I stared into the darkness between the trees, a form began to take shape. It was huge, at least 8 feet tall. Antlers sprouted from its head, but they were twisted and malformed. Its body seemed to shift and writhe, like it couldn't decide on a single form. But it was the eyes that made my blood run cold. Glowing crimson orbs that radiated pure malevolence. They locked onto me, and in that moment, I knew true terror. I grabbed Lucas's hand and ran. I could hear it crashing through the underbrush behind us, branches snapping like gunshots. Lucas was sobbing, struggling to keep up. I scooped him up without breaking stride, my lungs burning as I sprinted through the pitch-black forest. We burst into a small clearing, and I skidded to a stop. The thing was there, waiting for us. How had it gotten ahead? In the moonlight, I could see it more clearly, and I wished to God I couldn't. Its skin was a patchwork of rotting flesh and matted fur. Bones protruded at odd angles. And the smell, dear Lord, the smell. It was death and decay incarnate. It took a step towards us, and I felt Lucas go limp in my arms. The poor kid had passed out. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but I was frozen in place, unable to look away from those crimson eyes. A voice filled my head, but it wasn't sound. It was more like impressions, flashes of images and emotions, hunger, rage, a twisted sort of glee. And underneath it all, a vast, ancient intelligence that was so alien it made my mind recoil. Just when I thought I would lose my sanity, a shout rang out. "Ethan! Lucas!" It was Caleb, one of the other counselors. The creature's head snapped towards the sound, and in that split second the spell was broken. I turned and ran towards Caleb's voice, not daring to look back. We made it back to camp somehow. Lucas was still unconscious, and I was babbling incoherently. The other counselors, Caleb and Owen, exchanged worried glances as I tried to explain what had happened. But the words wouldn't come out right. How could I describe something so impossible? As dawn broke, Lucas woke up with no memory of what had happened. The camp director chalked it up to an animal encounter and said I must have panicked in the dark. But I saw the way Caleb and Owen looked at each other. They knew something. I cornered them later that day, demanding answers. At first they tried to brush me off, but I was insistent, and finally Owen sighed and motioned for us to follow him to a secluded part of the camp. "What you saw," he said in a low voice, "we've seen it too. It's been here for a long time, longer than the camp, longer than any of us." Caleb nodded grimly. "The locals call it the marsh walker. Every few years, someone goes missing in these woods. They're never found." I felt sick. Why didn't you warn me? Why are we even here if that thing is out there? Owen ran a hand through his hair. We hoped it was gone. There hadn't been any sightings in over a decade, and we can't just abandon the camp. It's the lifeblood of this community. I wanted to argue, to demand we evacuate, call the police, do something. But a small, rational part of my brain knew how insane it would sound. Who would believe us? The next few days were tense. I jumped at every shadow, every snapping twig. The other counselors tried to carry on as normal, but I could see the strain in their eyes. We were all waiting, wondering when it would return. And then it happened. Jenna, another counselor, didn't come back from her evening rounds. We searched for hours, calling her name until our voices were hoarse. As the sun began to rise, we found her backpack at the edge of the marsh. It was torn to shreds, and the ground around it was churned up like there had been a massive struggle. The police were called, search parties were organized, but deep down, we all knew Jenna was gone. That night I woke to the sound of someone moving around outside my cabin. I peeked out the window and saw Owen heading towards the marsh, a determined look on his face. Without thinking, I threw on my shoes and followed him. I caught up to him at the edge of the water. He was holding something. It looked like an old book bound in leather. "Owen, what are you doing?" I hissed. He turned, and I was shocked by the look in his eyes. It was a mixture of fear and resolve. "I'm ending this," he said. "I found this in the camp archives. It's a ritual to banish the creature." I wanted to argue, to tell him how crazy this was. But before I could say anything, a bone-chilling roar echoed across the marsh. Owen's eyes widened. "It's coming. Get out of here, Ethan. Run." I hesitated for a moment, but self-preservation kicked in. I ran back towards the camp, my heart pounding in my ears. Behind me, I heard Owen chanting in a language I didn't recognize. His voice rose to a shout, and then silence. I never saw Owen again. The police found no trace of him or Jenna. The official report blamed it on a bear attack, but those of us who were there know the truth. Something ancient and evil lives in Whispering Pines Marsh, and it's still out there, waiting. I left the camp the next day. I couldn't stay there, knowing what lurked in the shadows. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still hear that unearthly roar. And in my darkest moments, I wonder, did we really escape? Or is it just biding its time, waiting to finish what it started? I don't have answers. I don't think I ever will. All I know is that there are things in this world beyond our understanding. And sometimes it's better not to look too closely at the shadows, because you never know what might be looking back. I've been a park ranger at Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary for over a decade now, and I thought I'd seen it all. Gators, pythons, panthers, you name it. But nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered last month. It still haunts my dreams and makes me question everything I thought I knew about the natural world. It was a typical humid evening in the Everglades. I was doing my final patrol before sunset, checking on some of the more remote boardwalks and trails. The air was thick with the sounds of frogs and insects as dusk settled in. I remember feeling on edge, like something wasn't quite right. The wildlife seemed unusually quiet in certain areas. As I rounded a bend in the trail, movement caught my eye, something large weaving through the cypress trees about 50 yards away. At first I thought it was a deer, but its gait was all wrong, too fluid, almost boneless. My hand instinctively went to the sidearm on my hip as I squinted to get a better look in the fading light. What I saw next will be seared into my memory until the day I die. The creature emerged into a clearing, and I felt the blood drain from my face. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but impossibly tall and thin, at least 9 feet high. Its limbs were unnaturally long and jointed, like some kind of nightmarish stick insect. But worst of all was its face, just empty black sockets where eyes should be, and a mouth that split its skull nearly in half, filled with needle-like teeth. I stood there frozen as it turned those hollow sockets towards me. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then it let out a sound I can only describe as a warbling shriek and started loping towards me with terrifying speed. Adrenaline kicked in and I turned to run, heart pounding in my ears. I could hear it crashing through the underbrush behind me, gaining ground with each second. Somehow I made it back to my truck and peeled out of there, tires spinning on the gravel. I didn't slow down until I was miles away on the main road. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the steering wheel. What the hell had I just seen? I spent a sleepless night debating whether to report the incident. Who would even believe me? I had no proof, and it sounded insane even to my own ears. But I knew I couldn't just ignore what happened. The next morning, I went to my supervisor and told him everything. To my shock, he didn't seem surprised. He just sighed heavily and said, "So you've seen it too." I was hoping we'd have more time before it showed itself again. Turns out, I wasn't the first to encounter the creature. My supervisor called it the Nelisa Fileta, though he wouldn't explain the name's origin. He said sightings went back decades, maybe even centuries. A small group within the Park Service knew about it and worked to keep its existence hidden from the public. There are things in this swamp older and stranger than any of us can comprehend, he told me gravely. The Nelisa is just one of them. We do our best to maintain a balance, to keep it contained. But every so often, it gets hungry. I peppered him with questions, desperate to understand. Where did it come from? What did it want? How many people knew about this? But he was frustratingly vague, saying only that there were ancient forces at work beyond our understanding. He swore me to secrecy and said I'd be brought into their inner circle now that I'd seen the creature. Part of me wanted nothing to do with it, but a larger part needed answers. I couldn't just go back to normal after what I'd witnessed. The next few weeks were a blur of clandestine meetings and bizarre revelations. I learned about a shadowy group called the Keepers, who had protected the boundaries between our world and something else for generations. They spoke of dimensional rifts, of entities that slipped through, of sacrifices made to maintain the balance. It was almost too much to process. Everything I thought I knew about reality was being turned on its head. But stranger things were yet to come. About a month after my first encounter, I was out on a night patrol in a remote part of the swamp. The Keepers had given me special equipment to monitor for anomalies. Suddenly, my instruments went haywire. Before I could react, I felt a presence behind me. I turned to see the Nelisa looming over me, those empty sockets boring into my soul. I tried to run, but its limbs stretched out impossibly far, snagging me in an iron grip. Up close, its skin looked almost translucent, pulsing with an otherworldly energy. As it pulled me closer, I felt a searing pain throughout my body. It was like my very cells were being rewritten. I must have blacked out from the pain. When I came to, I was alone in the swamp, but something was terribly wrong. My body felt alien, stretched and distorted. I looked down at my hands and nearly screamed. My fingers had elongated into wicked claws. Stumbling to a nearby pool of water, I caught my reflection in the moonlight. My face was gaunt, eyes sunken and feral. I had become something inhuman. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The Nelisa hadn't just attacked me, it had transformed me into something like itself. The next days were a nightmare as I struggled with an overwhelming hunger and newfound abilities. I could stretch and contort my body in impossible ways. I could sense living things around me, feel their life force calling out like a beacon. And I wanted desperately to consume that energy. It took every ounce of my willpower not to give in to the predatory instincts now coursing through me. I hid deep in the swamp, terrified of what I might do if I encountered another person. The Keepers eventually found me, but even they seemed unsure of how to handle my transformation. They explained that this was unprecedented. Usually the Nelisa's victims were simply killed and devoured. My partial transformation into a similar entity was something they'd never seen before. They debated whether to destroy me as a potential threat, but I was determined to hold on to my humanity, to use my new form to fight back against the dark forces plaguing the swamp. It hasn't been easy. Every day is a battle against the monstrous hunger inside me, but I've managed to retain my consciousness and free will. Now I work with the keepers, using my abilities to track and contain other entities that slip through from beyond. I can sense them in ways humans can't. It's a lonely existence. I can never return to my old life, but at least I can use this curse to protect others. The Everglades hide secrets darker and stranger than most could imagine. Dimensional rifts, ancient beings, forces beyond comprehension. They're all real. I've seen it firsthand. So next time you're out in the swamp and feel eyes watching you from the shadows, trust your instincts. There are things out there that defy explanation, and some of us are working tirelessly to keep them at bay. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened to me or why. The hunger is always there, gnawing at the edges of my mind, but I refuse to let it consume me. I am more than the monster I've become, and I'll keep fighting to protect this realm from the horrors that lurk just beyond the veil of our reality. So, if you're ever in the Everglades and see a tall, unnaturally thin figure in the distance, don't approach. It might be the Nelisa coming to feed, or it might be me, standing guard against the darkness. Either way, count yourself lucky if you leave with nothing but a scary story to tell. The truth is far more terrifying than most could bear. From a young age, Sasha and I both sensed there was something off about the house. We'd hear strange noises at night, creaks and groans that went beyond normal old house sounds. Sometimes I'd wake up to find my bedroom door open when I was sure I'd closed it before going to sleep. Sasha would complain about feeling like someone was watching her, but our parents always brushed it off, saying we just had overactive imaginations. As we got older, the weird occurrences intensified. Objects would move on their own. We'd find scratches on the walls that weren't there before. Our dog Molly would bark at empty corners of rooms. But it wasn't until we turned 13 that things took a truly terrifying turn. It started with Sasha waking up screaming one night. When I ran to her room, she was huddled in the corner, shaking uncontrollably. Through her sobs, she told me she'd seen a horrifying creature crouched at the foot of her bed. A gaunt, pale humanoid figure with unnaturally long limbs. Its skin looked slimy and translucent, and its face was just a blank mask with black pits for eyes. The thing had been slowly crawling towards her on all fours when she woke up. I tried to comfort her, telling her it was just a nightmare. But deep down, a chill ran through me. I'd seen that exact same creature in my own dreams before. From that night on, our lives became a waking nightmare. The entity Sasha saw, which we started calling the Crawling Man, began appearing more frequently. At first it was just glimpses out of the corner of our eyes, or a flash of movement in the shadows, but gradually it grew bolder. I remember one afternoon I was home alone doing homework in my room. Suddenly, I heard a wet slapping sound coming from the hallway, like bare feet on hardwood. My blood ran cold as I realized it was getting closer to my door. I sat frozen in terror as the doorknob slowly began to turn. Just as the door started to open, I heard my mom's car pull into the driveway. The door slammed shut and the presence vanished. Sasha had it even worse. The Crawling Man seemed fixated on her for some reason. She'd wake up with strange bruises and scratches. Her belongings would go missing, only to turn up in weird places days later. She became a shell of her former self, constantly on edge, refusing to be alone, barely sleeping. Our parents still didn't believe us, even when we showed them the physical evidence. They thought Sasha was harming herself for attention, and that I was enabling her delusions. They even sent her to therapy, but of course that did nothing to stop the entity's attacks. Things came to a head about a month ago. It was a Friday night, and our parents were out at a work function. Sasha and I were watching TV in the living room, with Molly curled up between us. Suddenly, Molly's ears perked up, and she started growling at the hallway leading to the bedrooms. The air grew heavy and cold. The lights began to flicker, and then we saw it. The crawling man emerging from the shadows, moving in that unnatural, jerky way. Its lipless mouth was stretched in a wide grin, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. Molly leapt off the couch, barking furiously as she charged at the creature. But before she could reach it, the thing lashed out with one grotesquely long arm. Its clawed hand wrapped around Molly's throat and lifted her into the air. What happened next still haunts my nightmares. The crawling man's jaw unhinged like a snake, opening impossibly wide, and then it shoved Molly's entire body into its gaping maw. We could hear her muffled yelps of pain as the thing's throat bulged obscenely. Then there was a sickening crunch, and Molly went silent. Sasha and I were paralyzed with horror. The creature turned its eyeless face towards us, black ichor dripping from its mouth. It took a halting step in our direction. That finally snapped us out of our stupor. We bolted for the front door, fumbling with the lock as we heard the wet slapping of the thing's hands and feet on the floor behind us. We managed to get outside and ran down the street screaming for help. Our neighbors called the police, but of course when they searched the house they found nothing out of the ordinary. No sign of Molly or the horrific creature we described. Our parents were furious, thinking we'd let Molly run away, and made up a crazy story to cover for it. But Sasha and I know the truth. The crawling man is real, and it's still in that house. We've refused to spend another night there. Our parents think we're being ridiculous, but they've agreed to let us stay with our aunt for now, while they try to sell the place. I don't know why this entity targeted our family, or why it seems especially drawn to Sasha. I don't know if it's a ghost, a demon, or something else entirely. All I know is that it's evil and it's patient. I have a terrible feeling that no matter where we go, it will find us again someday. The worst part is, I don't think anyone will ever believe us about what really happened. How do you explain something so far outside the realm of normal human experience? Sometimes I wonder if I'm going crazy, if maybe it was all just an elaborate shared delusion. But then I remember the sound of Molly's bones crunching in that thing's jaw, and I know it was all too real. I'm writing this as a warning to others. If you ever encounter anything like what I've described, run. Don't try to fight it or reason with it. Just get as far away as you can, and pray it doesn't follow. Annoyed, I reached over to fiddle with the dial when movement caught my eye. There was a figure standing motionless on the side of the road up ahead. As I got closer, I could make out more details, and my blood ran cold. This wasn't a person. It was something else entirely. The thing was impossibly tall and thin, at least 8 feet high, but rail thin. Its limbs were elongated and oddly jointed like tree branches. But worst of all was its face, or rather, its lack of one. Where a face should have been was just smooth, pale flesh. I slammed on the brakes, my tires screeching. The The creature's head snapped toward me with unnatural speed. For a moment we just stared at each other, me frozen in terror, it standing unnaturally still. Then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone, vanished into the darkness. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the steering wheel. I floored it, speeding the rest of the way home with my heart pounding. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it, that I was just overly tired and my mind was playing tricks. But deep down, I knew what I had seen was real. I made it back to my apartment and locked the door behind me, double and triple checking it. I left all the lights on that night as I lay in bed, unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that faceless head turning toward me. The next few days I was on edge, jumping at every shadow. I kept seeing glimpses of pale, elongated limbs out of the corner of my eye. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. I started avoiding going out after dark. Then one night I woke up suddenly, sensing something was wrong. I opened my eyes and there it was, the creature, standing motionless at the foot of my bed. I was paralyzed with fear as it slowly tilted its featureless head, regarding me. Then it raised one impossibly long arm and pointed a skeletal finger directly at me. I screamed and bolted upright, fumbling for the light. When I turned it on, the thing was gone, but I knew it had been there. I could still feel its presence lingering. After that, I started seeing it everywhere, reflected in windows as I walked down the street, standing just out of sight around corners, always watching me with that blank, faceless head. I became paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder. I tried telling a few friends what was happening, but they just looked at me with concern and suggested I see a therapist. They thought I was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe I was. How could I know for sure? But the terror I felt was very real. Things escalated about a week later. I was in the grocery store, hurriedly grabbing supplies. As I turned down an aisle, there it was at the far end, the pale figure standing perfectly still among the shelves. I dropped my basket and ran. I burst out of the store, heart racing. As I sprinted to my car, I saw it again out of the corner of my eye, now on the far side of the parking lot, but undeniably there. I peeled out of there as fast as I could. That was when I realized it was hunting me. This thing, whatever it was, had targeted me specifically and was pursuing me relentlessly. I had no idea why or what it wanted, but I knew I had to get away. I drove for hours, heading out of the city with no real destination in mind, just trying to put as much distance between me and that thing as possible. But no matter how far I went, I kept catching glimpses of it, standing in fields as I sped past, reflected in my rearview mirror for a split second. Finally, exhausted, I pulled into a rest stop to try and collect myself. As I sat there with my head in my hands, headlights swept across the parking lot. I looked up, hoping to see another traveler, someone I could talk to, anyone to make me feel less alone. But it wasn't another car. Standing in the beam of the headlights was the creature. Only now I could see it clearly, illuminated in the stark light. Its body was emaciated, ribs and bones protruding from papery skin. The arms and legs were even longer than I'd realized, joints bending at impossible angles. And that blank, faceless head was turned directly toward me. I don't even remember starting the car. The next thing I knew, I was speeding down the highway again, tears streaming down my face. I drove through the night, fueled by terror and gas station coffee. Every time I thought I'd lost it, I'd spot those elongated limbs in my peripheral vision again. Dawn was just breaking when my car finally ran out of gas. I coasted to a stop on the shoulder of some nameless back road. For a long moment, I just sat there, utterly exhausted and out of options. Then slowly, I turned to look out the back window. There it was, standing in the middle of the road about 50 yards behind my car, motionless, waiting. I don't know how long we stayed like that, in a strange standoff. Me slumped in my dead car, it standing unnaturally still on the empty road. As the sun rose higher, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there forever. With shaking hands, I opened the car door and stepped out. The creature's head tracked my movement, but it didn't advance. I took a few trembling steps toward it, my legs threatening to give out. "What do you want?" I called out, my voice hoarse. "Why are you doing this?" It gave no response, just stood there, blank face aimed at me. I took another step forward. "Please," I begged, "just leave me alone. I can't take this anymore." For a moment nothing happened. Then slowly, jerkily, it raised one skeletal arm and pointed at me again. I felt a chill go through me as I realized this was it, the end of the chase. Whatever it planned to do to me, it was going to happen now. I closed my eyes, bracing myself. I heard a strange rustling sound like dry leaves in the wind. Then nothing. When I opened my eyes again, the creature was gone. The road was empty, save for my broken-down car. I spun in a circle, searching desperately, but there was no sign of it anywhere. Just me, alone on a dusty back road, as the sun climbed higher in the sky. That was 3 days ago. I managed to get a ride to the nearest town, where I'm staying in a cheap motel. I haven't seen the creature since that moment on the road, but I can still feel it out there, watching, waiting. I don't know what to do now. I can't go back to my old life. I don't think it's safe, but I can't keep running forever either. All I know is that something impossible hunted me across hundreds of miles, herded me to that specific spot on that lonely road, and then just left. Why? What was the point of it all? I lay awake at night, reliving every terrifying encounter, trying to make sense of it, but I can't. I don't think I ever will. All I can do is stay vigilant, always watching the shadows, because I know it's still out there, and I can't shake the feeling that someday, somehow, it will come for me again. I've been a police officer for over 15 years, but nothing could have prepared me for the case that landed on my desk last month. It started as a routine missing persons report. A 28-year-old woman named Emily hadn't returned home after going for a jog near Crescent Lake. Her husband reported her missing after 24 hours with no contact. At first, I wasn't too concerned. People go missing and turn up all the time. But as I started investigating, something felt off. Emily was described as responsible and punctual by everyone who knew her. It was completely out of character for her to vanish without a word. I headed out to Crescent Lake to retrace her steps. It was a crisp fall day, leaves crunching under my feet as I walked the trail she normally jogged. About 2 miles in, I noticed something glinting in the underbrush off to the side. My stomach dropped as I pushed aside the branches. It was Emily's phone. The screen cracked. I called for backup and we conducted a thorough search of the surrounding area. That's when we found her body, partially submerged in a marshy area just off the main trail. She had been strangled, her face frozen in terror. As I stared down at Emily's lifeless form, I felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with the cool weather. This was no accident or random act of violence. The calculated way her body had been hidden spoke of premeditation. We were dealing with a killer. The next few weeks were a blur of intense investigation. We combed through Emily's life, interviewed dozens of people, and analyzed every scrap of evidence. But we kept hitting dead ends. Whoever had done this was meticulous about not leaving traces. Then another body turned up. This time, it was a 35-year-old man found in the woods on the other side of the lake. Same M.O., strangled and hidden. The community was in a panic. I barely slept, poring over case files and evidence late into the night. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something obvious. Both victims were athletic, outdoorsy types who frequented the lake area. But beyond that, there seemed to be no connection between them. One night, as I was leaving the station, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. My blood ran cold as I read the words, "You'll never catch me, detective. I'm always one step ahead." I rushed back inside to dust for prints, but the paper was clean. Whoever we were dealing with was taunting us now. I doubled down on the investigation, determined to crack the case before they struck again. Days passed in a haze of coffee and adrenaline. I retraced every step, re-interviewed every witness. Finally, a breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A homeless man who lived in the woods reported seeing a white van parked near the second crime scene the night before the body was found. It wasn't much, but it was the first real lead we had. I put out an APB on white vans in the area and started canvassing local businesses that used work vehicles matching the description. 2 days later, we got a hit. A small landscaping company had recently hired a new employee who drove a white van. When I pulled up his file, my jaw dropped. He had a record, arrests for stalking and assault in another state, but the charges had been dropped. We brought him in for questioning. At first he was calm and collected, deflecting my questions with ease. But as the hours wore on, cracks started to show in his facade. I pressed harder, laying out the evidence we had. Finally, he broke. The confession poured out of him in a frenzied stream. He described in sickening detail how he had watched his victims for weeks, learning their routines, how he had followed them on the trails, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The look of fear in their eyes as he squeezed the life from them. I felt nauseous listening to him, but I forced myself to stay composed. We had him. Justice would be served for Emily, for the man in the woods, and for who knows how many other victims we hadn't found yet. As they led him away in cuffs, he looked back at me with a chilling smile. "You may have caught me," he said, "but you'll never understand why I did it. That's what will haunt you." He was right. In the weeks since the arrest, I've struggled to make sense of it all. How could someone become so twisted, so devoid of human empathy? I've seen my share of darkness on this job, but this case shook me to my core. The families of the victims got closure, but I'm not sure I ever will. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, the killer's words echoing in my mind. I've considered leaving the force, but I know I can't. As long as there are monsters out there, someone needs to stand against the darkness. So I keep showing up, keep doing the job, but I'll never look at Crescent Lake the same way again. What was once a place of natural beauty now feels tainted, a reminder of the evil that can lurk just beneath the surface of our everyday lives. I hope time will dull the edge of these memories, but I know they'll never fully fade. This case changed me, showed me depths of human depravity I never wanted to see. But it also showed me the resilience of the human spirit, the victims who fought till the end, the families who never gave up hope, my fellow officers who worked tirelessly to bring a killer to justice. In the end, that's what I try to hold on to. Yes, there is darkness in this world, but there are also those who shine a light against it. And as long as I'm able,